Morning and welcome to the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, specifically called for deliberations. This morning we'll open our meeting with Karakia. I oha ki runga ki a ranganui, I oha ki raro ki a papatuanuku, te rekina ngā mea kino ki te pai atia, uhia mai o korowai aroha, hei taonga mā mātou. Ka puta ki te whai au, ki te ao marama, humie, huie, taikie. Would you like to stand for our karakia? Songbirds, please have your mics on. Te awa tupua mai ki te kahui maunga ki tangaro ka wakapiria mai kona piringa hinako tama upoko tupoho po te kie ko o te awa ko o te awa ko erere te awa tupua. Lovely, thank you everybody. Right, where are we at with the apologies? Diane?
Deputy Mayor Helen.
She's an apology for the full meeting. Yes. So, our
I'm sorry.
Yes. So, apologies for Deputy Mayor Helen Craig and Councillor Charlie Anderson. We have an apology just from Mayor Andrew, who's going to need to go out of the meeting for about half an hour, around 10 o'clock. So, I'll move those apologies. I think Josh was
sorry,
seconding.
I think is Councillor Peter Oscombe apology as well? I think he is.
You think he is?
I think he is.
I don't recall seeing it, but it doesn't mean. All right, we'll put Peter in there just in case he's an apology, and if not, we'll take him out. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Any declarations of interest in relation to our items of business this morning? No declarations, thank you. Just before we move on to reports to the committee, I'm not sure whether all committee members have had the joy of being involved in deliberations before, but they can be quite lengthy. That said, I see we've got cleared out till 3 o'clock. I do not expect this meeting to take that long. In fact, I expect it to be finished by lunchtime, which gives us a little bit of flexibility about what lunchtime means. But I will try and run the meeting pretty much along the lines of standing orders, but we might need to allow a little bit of flexibility for asking questions as we develop the recommendations, just in terms, because they might get to be quite detailed. So we'll all need to work together on that. But basically, yes, please try and ask your questions up front, but we'll allow a little bit of latitude when we get into developing recommendations. So, reports to the committee. 4.1, deliberations on the Solid Waste Bylaw. Thank you, Hannah and Elise. Welcome.
Good morning. Just so you're all aware, Because there were a few questions last time specifically around the events section of this, I'm going to slow down for that one and put in a bit more detail. There'll be a bit more time for discussion. Once we're through that section, I'll kind of speed up and take you through the other ones at a more high level because they seem to be a bit less controversial. But if you want to go into more depth in any of those, feel free to slow me down and we can discuss them in more detail as well.
Fantastic. Do you want questions as you go through each section, Hannah? Yeah? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's more helpful if you ask questions as we go, because where we don't want to end up is that the resolutions are put and then there's still questions, or exactly as you were saying, Kate, we'd rather work through it together. So, yeah, thanks for that.
So, this is the proposed Solid Waste Bylaw. So this has been out for consultation for a month, from the 20th of February to the 20th of March this year. We received a total of 27 submitters, none of whom wanted to speak to their submission, which is why we're doing kind of hearings and deliberations together. The majority of people who submitted were in support of all recommendations. And yeah, that's kind of the overview, so I'll get into the actual kind of topic headings. So the first question is around events. The proposed solid waste bylaw requires events above a certain threshold to submit a waste plan, a waste management plan to council to be approved, and then report on how the waste management plan went after the fact. We've intentionally pitched the threshold as not something that's highly specific. It's not above an expected certain number of attendees, for example. It's any event of a significant size that is measured in either number of attendees, how long it's expected to run, or has the potential to generate a significant amount of waste. And also there is an additional requirement that the event needs to be either happening on council property or with council funding, or the event organisers have proactively asked us to assist them with waste management. So it needs to be an event of a certain size that also kind of has brought council to the table themselves in one way or another. The vast majority of supporters were in favour of this requirement. This is also, during the consultation period, I went out and spoke to other other local authorities and looked at what other councils have in place. What we're requiring here is not significantly different. It was based on the work of other councils to begin with, and this is not an uncommon requirement. And there aren't any kind of significant issues that we would expect in its application. There is sort of an even split between councils who have a hard threshold, like say an expected attendees of more than 1,000, or councils who have a sort of a lighter threshold like what we're proposing. We're keeping to that recommendation as we think it's more appropriate for the size of the Wanganui district. If we were expecting a lot bigger events, then having a hard threshold becomes kind of more feasible, but we get a greater diversity of smaller events which can't always easily fit under one specific category heading, and in discussions with the venues and events team internally, it's not always the biggest events that cause the most issues around waste. So being able to capture events that might create a significant amount of waste but not have a whole lot of attendees could be really important in managing waste around events and within the district. Reports from other councils are that they've found these kind of rules work fairly well. They can help establish ongoing relationships with event organisers and encourage them to think about waste in relation to the events that they're putting together and start operating in ways that can reduce quite a lot of costs for them as well. So our recommendation on this is the same as it was when it was brought up for approval to consult. And I'm happy to take any questions about that topic, go into more detail, but that kind of...
So any questions about the events part of it? No questions? All right. Oh, just wait.
All the questions, it's pretty well the same split, like 22-3-1 sort of thing. There seems to be a pattern there. Have you got any comment on it? It seems that there are 2 or 3 people opposed to every question.
Broadly, yes. There was some. If you go through the volume of submissions, you can see who voted what way. There were a couple of people who were in support of some things and not in support of others, but broadly, it's most people kind of kept on a trend of whether they liked it or whether they didn't.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would say it was more, as you're saying, it was more in principle. People in principle supported the proposal, or in principle they were against it, as they felt it was more bureaucracy, not understanding that a lot of things like the waste plan is actually already part of our practice, but the bylaw formalises it.
Okay, move along.
So the next is around rubbish collection data. So there are numerous private
Focus if you're talking.
rubbish collection services. This is specifically for like rubbish collection, not what under the Act is categorised as waste, which is everything including recycling, green waste and that kind of thing. This is specifically for rubbish pickup. We currently don't have any relationship with those private operators, so we don't have any data coming in about where waste is coming in around the district, where the problem areas are, that kind of thing, where the rubbish is going after it's collected. This would allow us to collect that data, essentially, and has broad approval from the majority of submitters. And I'm happy to take questions on that, or we'll move on.
No questions? Don't feel obliged, but you're welcome to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Page 10, item 12, it says currently these collection services operate with no relationship to council, and you mentioned we're not able to gather the data. Then it says the proposed bylaw would require them to obtain a licence from council in order to operate, and a condition of the licence would be to provide this data. So when that comes into effect, does that mean this applies from July? When does it become effective?
So there is, well, the requirement to get a license will become effective when the bylaw comes into force. I believe I should have included a section with a transitional phase, essentially, for rubbish collectors that are currently operating that will need to be licensed. So there is a transitional period during which they can get licensed. They won't immediately have to shut down until we license them, essentially, because nobody wants that.
So part 2 is, and final, is when you were contacting other councils and authorities, they are doing what we intend to do?
Mm-hmm. So
and how has that worked for them?
So the feedback around this mostly came from industry. This wasn't through consultation or through talk to other councils. This was through our internal teams speaking to the local waste collection sector. And yes, they operate under these kind of rules in plenty of other districts, and it's not a significant issue.
All right, thanks, Ross. Philippa?
Would you be so inclined to forgive me for struggling to get to ask a question about an event?
Yep, go.
Thank you so much. Sorry, you may have answered, but just in the actual, obviously in the bylaw, no, the whatever. Anyway, going to just had events. Well, page 11 of reference 1. So it does say, I'll just read, if I could just read this briefly, this is one sentence. Mm-hmm. An organiser of an event is responsible for the waste created for the event and must have a council-approved event waste management and minimisation plan. I know reading this, it looks like there's lots of latitude there, and we're really only expecting larger events as a must, but it is kind of a little bit scary if you actually go to the bylaw and you go, I must have a plan. I must get the council's approval. So can you just help lead me there a wee bit, please?
So the way it's drafted is, if you go to page 5, the definition of event is where kind of the size is included. If you're not comfortable with that, then we could change the wording so that essentially the defined term on page 5 rather than event is significant event, and then the term we use in the clause is significant event. So it's clear in the drafting that that's intended, but that is covered. But yeah, if you're concerned about the impression the drafting gives, then we can amend the terminology so that it's a bit more kind of it looks a bit less broad.
Look, I think the terminology is really good. So I think it filters, kind of as you step down and work through each aspect in there, I think it's really good, and I think we should give it a whirl, frankly. Let it work as drafted. I mean, I've kind of put my hat on and thought about if I was an event organiser, would I be captured, wouldn't I be captured? And I think it satisfies it really well. So,
from a legal policy perspective, if you looked at the clause, you would then be looking at the definition, but I'm not sure how much that comes across to a layperson, I suppose. Like, this is fairly standard drafting from a legal policy perspective.
So is there any guidance that you put up front with policies like this?
Not generally.
Like on the website?
We can do. I think it would.
We have actually suggested with this one in particular that there could, when you come to the landing page, there can be we can lift that definition of event and make it very clear that is what we mean by those are the events which are captured. So if you would like that additional step, we can do that.
Absolutely.
So that, because then it will be very clear to people, rather than having to look in the bylaw, and we can give you reassurance that when you see it in the clauses, when that word is used along with any other word which is defined, you need to look at the definition. But if you think that's something that's helpful to bring up on the website, we can do that.
I think so. But I personally think that this wording gives enough flexibility, which you explained is sort of needed in this regard. But it also, sort of specifies as well. But I think that what you just suggested is a good step as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, thanks
Good
for giving me the
discussion,
time.
thank
I
you.
just think it does. Yeah, that would help.
I'll
But thank
try
you very
not to
much.
do 3 strikes, but yeah.
Well, so if we're comfortable with data collection, I'm happy to move on to the next section.
Yes, please.
So this is about waste disposal facilities. To start off, as you'll see from paragraph 16, waste disposal facility is a fairly broadly defined term legally. For the purposes of this, we're talking about landfills, not recycling centres, not green waste drop-offs specifically. This is about landfills. And we don't currently have any within the district, but if any wanted to open, they would be required to get a license from council and provide us with the same data that the private rubbish collection services will have to provide to us, just so that we can continue to keep an eye on how waste is being managed within the district. It's entirely hypothetical at this point, but it could be important at some stage later on. Any questions?
No, move on.
Lastly is enforcement. Again, this is fairly simple. We do have enforcement powers that allow us to take legal action. This also gives us the ability to manage some of the services that we'll be providing, and back up some of the rules within the bylaw. Again, broad support from the majority of submitters, and I'm happy to take questions.
No questions.
So, if you're all happy with that, our recommendations haven't materially changed from when we got approval to consult. We accept that the bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing issues arising around solid waste. The proposed solid waste bylaw is the most appropriate form of bylaw, and it is not inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. We can recommend that council adopt it, which will happen, I believe, at the next council meeting on the 7th of May. And I'm happy to take any other general questions. And suggesting that this comes into force on the 1st of July.
All right, so if we're getting to the stage where we're going to put the recommendation, can we be sure that there's no further questions? No, I'm good. All right, so would someone like to move the recommendation as drafted up there? Jenny? Thank you. Rob, second. So if you'd like to just scroll down a little bit, please, Diane. Down? No, sorry, up. So the recommendation before us is that the committee recommends that council confirm that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the issues arising around solid waste and meeting our obligations under the Waste Plan 2021 to 27, and the proposed Solid Waste Bylaw 2024 is the most appropriate form of bylaw, and the proposed Solid Waste Bylaw 2024 is not inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990, and adopts the proposed Solid Waste Bylaw 2024 with any minor amendments to come into force 1 July 2024. Is there any discussion, debate? Charlotte?
I'd like to thank all the staff involved in creating this bylaw. The information that we have received all the way through since pre-engagement has been really concise and good. And I'm really pleased that this bylaw will help us meet our obligations to start reducing waste from our landfills and be able to have data to prove that. So thanks.
Nicely said, Charlotte. I'll just tautoko what Charlotte has said and add my thanks for the work. I think the fact that you've had very few questions here this morning means that it's been a good process, and councillors are feeling well informed. Rob, did you want to speak?
Yeah, do, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm very pleased to see this bylaw come into existence. This has been talked about for a long period of time, and really it stemmed from a lack of data coming forward on the waste that's collected in this district because of the private operation of the waste system in Wanganui. Now, this has affected all the way through what targets could be set for waste reduction, because we don't really know what's been collected now. And the data that was collected purely relied on the cooperation of the waste companies. Now they are legally obligated to provide this information in the format that we desire, and I think that's an important move forward. The other point is that I go back to when the Multicultural Food Festival started in Majestic Square. Wonderful event. I was appalled. The rubbish bins that were there, the existing rubbish bins, were full within an hour and overflowing. And I initiated a talk about the solid waste bylaw at that time because organisers of events need to take responsibility for their waste. And I think that's what this does. Now, that multicultural festival now are very well organised for their waste. They've done it without the waste bylaw, they've done it with their own responsibility. But there are still other events in town that aren't giving a consideration at all to the waste that they're generating and who has to pay to collect it. So I think I totally support this bylaw. Thank you.
All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Did you vote against? Michael voted against. All right. Thank you. We'll move on then to item 4.2. Deliberations, naming and numbering policy. Welcome, Justin and Chital.
Through the chair. This item is for the the naming numbering policy. It used to be the road naming, however, now with bringing parks into it, there's obviously a slight change. The way we intend to proposing to run this is to basically work through the summary of submissions, because it deals with the 5 topics sequentially, and tries to create a little bit of structure for members to, if that's agreeable. And there are 5 main topics. 3 of them are reasonably straightforward. The last 2 need a little bit more. Members would turn some a little bit of attention to that, because there's some things that calls need to be made around some of that stuff.
Justin, just before you launch into it, has everybody met Chantal?
So this is Chantal Patan. She is one of our policy planners. I think this is her first time presenting to council. So, she has been with us how long now? 7 months, and she's stepped in to help with the naming and numbering policy.
Lovely, welcome. Lovely to have you here, Chantal.
Thank you.
So I'll hand over to Chantal to deal with the topics.
So everybody, this is Chantal's first time here. Let's be really nice. Yeah, only the hard questions to Justin, all right? Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. So like Justin has mentioned, we had 5 main issue topics, and I'm going to very quickly start with topic 1.
Chantal, move the mic a little bit closer to you, please. Thank you.
Topic 1, which is naming criteria. So the current theme in the existing policy includes traditional or appropriate Maori name, historical person or event, significant geographical or topographical features, personal name for special service. So the proposal was to add native flora, fauna, and native birds and animals to the themes of the naming criteria. So from the consultation, a total of 24 responses were received, where majority were in support. So 22 respondents agreed, 1 disagreed, and 1 was neutral. So respondents that agreed, there were 22, so their reasons are as follows. So this proposal recognizes our native wildlife and endangered species. It's a logical and a reasonable approach, and it encourages a cohesive street naming. So as per our office comment, it is identification of the themes allows for consistency when naming streets and parks, and provides guidance for those doing so. So as per our recommendations, we accepted all submissions and no further changes were proposed, and we're open to recommendations and happy for any questions.
So just the questions around the criteria for naming?
Yes.
Yeah. Any questions around that, folks? No?
Yeah.
Charlotte.
So with the inclusion of today of native flora, fauna, native birds, was that something that was once in the policy but has now been taken, but was then taken out? And I ask because, we have numerous street names with native flora and fauna and bird names currently.
No, it wasn't part of the policy when the original 2018 policy was drafted. So, but that's not to say that over our time we haven't had different streets or names used.
It's just to say that we didn't have a policy for it.
Well, effectively, and that's and secondly the theming. You see different areas have different themes, and obviously that is developed over the last 100 plus years that we've basically been naming streets in Wanganui for.
Thanks.
So up until 2018 we had lots of street names that were after trees, and then we stopped. Andrew, did you have a question?
Yes, it's probably a broad question across all of these, but my question is around a renaming of streets. So if we've got a current name that maybe for whatever reason we're not happy with, does the scope of this include renaming?
With the policy under, as part of in diligent, you will see a copy of the you'll see a copy of the policy. There's also a copy in the links as well. Under 5.5, it deals with the renaming of or renaming of an existing road. So there's a couple of things that council needs to go through, or in considering that. If it's just a simple spelling correction, it's reasonably straightforward. However, if it is a change of name, council needs to consider existing users on the road, basically the benefit. Does the benefit of changing that name outweigh the costs, or what people associate with it? So yes, there's a process, and yes, there's clear criteria intentionally with that. We haven't substantively changed those criteria because we considered that those criteria struck a good balance.
Okay. Can I ask a supplementary question to that? What if it's a Whakatahi road? It's not in our jurisdiction necessarily.
Then we don't have jurisdiction over the naming of that road. So we would have to write to NZTA and ask for formal, or go through their process as road naming authority. So this only applies to local roads under that we are the road controlling authority for.
All right. So we'll move on to naming of parks.
Yep. So very quickly, naming of parks. So our proposal was to add naming of parks within the policy. So for this one, we had 25 responses, where again majority in support, 21 agreed, 1 disagreed, and 3 neutral. So the reasons for their agreeing was that names must be interesting enough to attract people back into the parks, and opportunity to recognize and value Maori names. For their comment, our officer comment was that the Reserves Act 1977 provides a process for naming of reserves. However, not all spaces operating as parks are classified as reserves for the purpose of Reserves Act. While the naming or renaming of parks is not a regular occurrence, each area follows a similar process to name road names in finding an appropriate name, and therefore considered appropriate to include within the policy. So we noted the submission, and no further changes were proposed, and we are happy to take any questions.
Ross?
Thank you, Chair. On my page 21, and it defines the responsibility of the naming panel. 2 things. It says, I'm glad that we're bringing parks and reserves into the policy. That's new. And it says, entitled, naming of parks and reserves underline. Then it says, new park, make a recommendation. Renaming of parks, which is part 2 of my question, make a recommendation. But it doesn't actually say anything about reserves under that heading. So that's my first question.
If we could come to that, that's the next topic.
Oh.
If that's all right, we will address that shortly, if that's okay.
Yep,
If there's no other questions.
We'll just keep going, and it does slightly relate to naming of parks, but if we can park that until we get to that submission topic 4.
Okay.
So you'll get an answer, Ross. Good question. Was there another one specifically
I'm not
in
sure if this
relation?
is going to be car park, but okay. So with the renaming of parks matter, happy for it to car park. The panel has the ability to make a recommendation. My question is, when the panel is considering, and I know it would be a very rare event, one would hope it's a rare event that we rename a park, that the panel would have the ability to perhaps call for expressions of interest from people who might have a particular relationship to that park to advise them? Would that come into it?
Through the chair, we can talk to that a little bit and when we talk about the panel, but effectively the point of the panel is to provide a forum for a discussion about some of those names, and it provides a forum where things can be or some of those can actually be discussed, worked through in a practical or in a practical process. It also allows for iwi engagement through that process, and also community community engagement through that, or community representative engagement. Most of the time, where you would have you naming a park, there would probably be a public process, because you would be through the reserve, or a reserve plan, or a reserve plan, and or other processes which are happening alongside it. That's one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about this later, why parks are recommendation only. So council's making the final decision based on all feedback.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Josh.
That's all right, thank you. Just a question that follows on from Ross's. So, in terms of how an individual or group goes about initiating a street name change, that's quite explicit in that it has to be, I think, 80% of people on the street. In terms of parks, that isn't stated explicitly how a person. The policy talks about an individual being able to initiate, but it doesn't talk about what that process would look like. So can you clarify what the expectations would be if someone wanted to bring a proposal to council around that?
The reason why haven't been explicit is because it will depend on exactly the process that it's going through. If it's under the Reserves Act, there's clear notification and other steps they've got to go through. When it comes to pieces of ground that look like parks but might not be reserves, which is the reason why we use the broader definition of park, is that we would then need to consider something might have an informal name that we might be or formalising something, or we would need to then go through and say, hey, look, who are the users of the park? Who is affected by this decision? And then we'd need to go through, like any decision of council, we need to meet our local government requirements to seek feedback from those affected by the changes. So we would tailor the process to suit, or we'll tailor the process to suit the significance of or what's being proposed, or what is being proposed.
Okay, and it would be up to. It would then be up to officers to determine whether or not that investigation period is actually conducted or not. Is that right?
Through the chair, we wouldn't initiate consultation, or formal consultation on something like that without coming to council, requesting, we're looking at doing this, we're doing formal consultation on this. We would obviously there would be investigation, or potentially investigation in terms of what the issues might be. Is it something that should be proceeded with? How serious is the request, or is it just something that is sitting in the background, and how might is it something that we should be doing? We would work through with me, or both. That's why we're using the naming panel within that recommendation kind of space, but also obviously the final decision sits with council, with any names, with parks. Well, that's the recommendation.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Moving on to naming panel.
Thank you. So issue 3, naming panel. So currently the naming panel sits outside the road naming and numbering policy, and it was proposed to add the panel within the policy. So we had 22 responses, and again majority were in support, 18 agreed, 1 disagreed, and 3 neutral. So the reasons to agree was that it is logical to have the naming panel sitting in the policy, and naming panel needs to be reviewed after a certain period. To comment that decision making by panel is intended to be by consensus. Where the panel is unwilling or unable to reach consensus, the decision shall be referred to the council. So the office's recommendations, all the comments were accepted and noted, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thinking everybody's had the opportunity to read the terms of reference of the naming panel and the composition thereof. So is there any questions coming from that? Chantal or Justin, do you want to just go through who the composition of the panel would be?
That's topic 5, but yes, we can. So broadly speaking, the current composition is two community representatives and 2 iwi or hapu or iwi representatives, and non-voting is the planning officer. It's recommended that members consider whether or not elected member would add value to being on that panel. It is also recommended that a developer's representative has speaking rights at the panel, but not necessary decision making at that, because it's designed to be a forum that you can basically discuss names and why the names are considered to be important. And as part of that, if there was an elected member decided to be added to the panel, I would suggest that the planning officer could drop off into a supportive role with the elected member being potentially the chair.
Michael?
Sorry, just to clarify, 2 community, 2 iwi, 1 planning officer. So there's 5, right? Cool. And what was the rationale of a developer not having a voting say?
At this stage, because the developer or the developer's representative is not the same person right the way through the process, it makes it a little bit more tricky from procedurally to have them be part of that formal process. However, the nature of the way that these meetings work, because it's by consensus or because it's being done by consensus, it's all views are being taken into account as they're going forward. So that's pretty much the reason at this stage why we've suggested that the developer does not have voting rights at that panel. However, if members consider that they should have voting, we can amend the panel terms of reference to reflect that.
Just to clarify, what is a developer?
In this situation, it is usually someone undertaking a subdivision, and as part of the subdivisions, that's when most roads get named. In the terms of a park, that would probably be the council's parks officers, or unformed road would be our roading team.
That makes sense. Thank you.
So just before I take any more questions, I have jumped over what Chantal was reporting to us on. So Chantal, would you like to just report to us about the submissions on the composition, and then I'll take the rest of the questions. Although, I mean, you could also talk about the delegations of the panel, and then I think we'll get into all the questions about the actual panel, if that's all right. So if you'd talk to submission topic 5, then topic 4, and then we'll take more questions, assuming that they're relating to the powers and the composition of the panel. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. So, issue 5, composition of naming panel. So, the purpose of naming panel is to consider naming options, assess the names against the policy criteria, and reach consensus on the name. So, proposed composition of the naming panel is community representative, mana tangata whenua, elected member, and developer. A total of 24 responses were received for the topic. So, I'm gonna go one by one for each representative. So for community representative, a total of 22 respondents indicated yes to support and 2 indicated no. So their reason was that it's going to be a effective decision making if views are drawn from different perspectives in the panel, and it's going to be a fair decision. So as per our comment, the panel is intended to provide a forum for community EV developers to provide feedback on the naming of roads. And a respondent that indicated no did not put any comment. So their comments were noted. Moving on to the Mana Tangata Whenua, there were 21 response for yes. Their reasons were that effective decision making of views are drawn from different perspectives in this panel, and respondent that indicated no reasoned that proposed panel does not reflect the community demographic. So our comment was that the panel is intended to provide a forum for the community iwi developers to provide feedback on naming of roads. Again, their comments were noted. Moving on to the elected member, there were 15 that indicated yes. So their reasons were elected member should chair the group, and 6 that indicated no. Their reasons were that elected member does not play a significant role in the panel, and other panel members do, sorry. Elected members should attend panel meetings and give opinion to the best of their knowledge. Our comment was that when first established, the naming panel included the mayor. The community should consider whether or not the appointment of an elected member to the panel would add value to the naming panel. Their comments were noted. Moving on to the developer, there were 15 that indicated yes, and their reasons were landowner or developer should make the final decision along with the EV suggestions, and 7 indicated no. Their reasons were that developers often generate names that are generic and do not fall into the criteria, and there was 1 that indicated NA, and their reason was that invite developers to allow input from the commercial perspectives and their working relationship with EWI. As per officer comment, the panel is intended to provide a forum for community EWI and developers to provide feedback on the naming of roads, and their comments were accepted. Thank you. Now we're happy to take any questions on that.
Would you like to move on and talk about the naming panel delegation? So that's the authorities of them, and just report on that?
Sure, thank you.
Because I think the questions will be kind of ranging between the whole thing, composition and delegations.
Thank you. So naming panel delegations, we had 24 responses, and highest proportion of the responses considered that panel should make recommendation. So for new roads and unformed roads, 25 respondents considered that panel should make recommendations, while 11 considered that panel should make decisions, and 1 considered that panel should not have any role in naming new and unformed roads. So the reasons for indicating that panel should make decision, it was at consult with EV and community before decision is made, and 12 that indicated panel should make recommendations. The reason was that the council should make final decision, and for respondent that indicated no role did not put any comment. So as per officer comment, the panel provides a forum for the community, EV and developers to provide feedback. And moving on, new roads and the naming of unformed paper roads are often less contentious and lend themselves to a simple decision-making process. And decision-making by panel is intended to be consensus, where panel is unwilling or unable to reach a consensus. The decision is intended to be referred to the council for final decision. So all the comments were accepted and no changes were proposed.
Thank you.
Moving on to the existing renaming. So there were 12 respondents. Respondents considered that panel should make recommendations, while 9 considered that panel should make decision, and 2 considered that panel should not have any role in existing and renaming this policy. So the comments for panel to make decision was that it okay, I'm going to talk about the recommendation. So there were 12 that indicated panel to make recommendation. So their reason was that panel discusses and makes recommendation without allowing developer dominating the process, and also include the public feedback. So our comment was that renaming can be initiated by either the private individuals, groups, or council, and often have more complex issues, including the views of existing residents of a particular road. Given the need to balance competing interests with the renaming of an existing road, council is considered to be more appropriate the decision maker. So the comments were noted and no further changes were proposed. Moving on to the naming or renaming of parks. Yep. We had 9 that indicated panel should make a decision, and 13 indicated that panel should make a recommendation. So the comments are as follows. Final decision should be made by council, and panel oversees the proposed names to ensure no appropriate names is chosen. So as per the officer comment, again, given the need to balance competing interests with the renaming and naming of parks, council is considered to be more appropriate the decision maker. All these submissions were noted and no further changes were proposed. Thank you.
So
Okay.
happy to take any questions.
Yeah, a lot closer advice from submitters around which way we go in terms of making decisions and recommendations.
Yeah. One of the things that we would just note is that as part of the pre-engagement survey that was done, I think we had about 129 people responded to that that survey. So that is a larger group of people. I know that feedback should also be considered, and there was a stronger wish to have the panel in a recommendationary point of view. However, as we've talked about the different decisions, there are benefits to the panel making decisions for the new names and unformed roads, in our view, in officer's view.
So just remind me, or perhaps the meeting, currently the naming panel makes these decisions.
For new roads and unformed roads only.
But we haven't been naming parks and reserves or renaming them lately, have we?
No, but also
renaming.
under the current policy, renaming or existing roads the terms of reference of the panel does not enable them to make a decision on renaming of existing roads.
Right. Okay. I have a question. The actual terms of reference talk about up to 4 iwi or hapu representatives.
Mm-hmm.
What have we got?
So currently there's 2, and both of them are from Tipaho, and then when a road is in a rohe of another iwi, we invite that iwi to be part of it. Now that process is a little bit clunky, and when we're working through that process, what would be a better process would be for us to invite all four of our local iwi to basically have a standing representative on the panel, and then when a road is within the area, they can provide feedback or send their representative when it suits them. And that was potentially an option that we would like the committee to consider. Also, we have allowed the ability that, where appropriate, a hapu may attend where something specifically affected them. But we're looking to provide some flexibility around that to try and enable a forum that could have or constructive discussions around that naming.
Okay. I'm not sure that the policy as drafted reflects the standing items, standing members aspect.
No, the policy is silent on the composition of the panel. that is dealt with in the terms of reference, because the terms of reference are designed to be able to be changed more frequently if necessary without having to change the entire policy. So
Sorry, Justin, I meant the terms of reference. My read of the terms of reference is that, and I'll read you this bit. Under the membership of the panel, it says, should the road or park naming be in an area of interest by more than one iwi, and then it goes through to name the four local iwi, whichever is appropriate to the subject road or park will be invited to the relevant meeting and will have voting rights. So I think if we land on having standing members of all four iwis, iwi, then it should be reflected in there.
Happy to do that.
Thank you. All right, questions? Philippa?
So I just, you said earlier, Justin, about, well, obviously page 21, under submission topic 4, around the naming panel delegation. So, sorry, the new roads and unformed roads, I'm a little bit, that make a decision rather than a recommendation. So you said, in officer's view, that's kind of where you land, or where you would be. Could you elaborate on that? The reasoning, but why you'd suggest that the committee could make a decision rather than a recommendation to council?
So for new roads and unformed roads, the people who are directly affected by that new road typically end up being your developer who's actually developing the road, because often, most of the time, that comes out of a subdivision or development. The other people that are involved in that are your iwi groups that you might engage. Then secondly, the other input that you kind of want to have in that space is probably your community, or some community input feedback, people with some understanding, knowledge of the past history of the area, and stuff like that. So typically you have a pretty good space for those to be making a decision on the new name or on an unformed road at that stage. It also means that there is less process that needs to be followed in terms of council meetings, agendas, or timelines. That we can actually hold meetings when we need to, and it's a little bit quicker in that space as well from an administrative point of view.
So just a bit further. So, but if we're, I mean, kind of, get that with the subdivision to a degree, but I think, for example, don't get me wrong here, but for example, Pointer Place is not, it's just a road, a small road off Alma Road, if it's named after former Mayor Tez Pointer, if that's correct. But also, if we were looking at, another road, it may not even be a substantial road, but it could be, that whole thing, mayors, whatever. I could say, Kerry Gala, New Zealand, Wanganei's first only Olympic gold medalist in any sport, for example, and I'm going, so there's things that will come out of you go, someone's done something quite extraordinary, and people will have a whole lot of, some could be quite historic and some sooner, but where would, I would, my question would be, wouldn't it be, it could be quite that committee or whatever it is not likely to have the width and breadth of information needed to make all those decisions on new roads.
The question is, how would that committee get the width and breadth of information of what might be available as possible names?
Thank you.
Usually, because those new roads and unformed roads are part of subdivision and land development, typically, or the current process is that developers are basically putting up to 3 names as part of that process. It is only where the developer's names are not appropriate, or the developer has chosen not to put up a name, will be where we potentially looking for additional or alternative names. We do have a list of names that have been put up through a suggestion for road or potential road names. However, since I've been dealing with the road naming panel, we haven't actually needed to dip into those or have a look at those names because we've had names provided to us.
Just I don't think I've ever seen or had any input as an elected member, or aware of elected members or council having input into a list of names. I could be wrong, but I can't recall that.
There was some work done after the 2018 road naming policy. I haven't had much involvement in it, in that process. So I would have to go back and have a look what input members had or did not have.
Michael?
Sorry, I can't seem to open the terms of reference. But in the paper it says 221. We spoke about it 10 minutes ago. But now you're saying 4-2. Who would be on this panel if it was decision making? How many people? How many votes?
At this stage, the recommendation is 2 community representatives, an iwi or an iwi representative. In the rohe, it is often there's overlapping rohe with these. And then there would be the elected member at this as part per the officer recommendation, and a developers representative with the ability with speaking rights at the meeting.
But it does say up to 4 iwi or hapu representatives, and the suggestion would be that they would have standing membership of that committee or panel, so they would be aware of what's coming up and being considered, and if they had a view, then they would put forward that view. So talking about what as it's drafted, it's 4 to 7 standing members, and then possibly the developer and a planning officer.
So that's what I was getting at, Madam Chair. I think it says it could be 9 people in a room over a name of a street.
Yeah, it can be quite important.
To assist
Charlotte?
Councillor Law in this, considering he can't open his terms of reference, the note at the bottom of the membership of the panel and term says, should the road or park naming be in an area of interest by more than one iwi/hapu, one representative of Tupuho, Tamaupoko, Ngāruru, or Ngāti Apa, whichever is appropriate to the subject road or park, will be invited to the relevant meeting and will have voting rights. So that just creates some flexibility depending on where the road or park is located.
Yeah, that's not quite what I'm suggesting, Charlotte, that it'll be slightly different than that those 4 members would be standing and just come as and when needed.
Yeah, that is my interpretation of the terms of reference, though, as it is stated. Like, I'm in agreement with you.
All right. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go back and because it's the nuances of how this panel's going to work is, I think, going to be perhaps what needs a little bit of work. So can I just go through and see if we've got general agreement about, for example, adding native flora and fauna to the criteria for naming? Just, I'm not asking for votes, I'm just asking for a general feeling. Are you thinking that that would be a good idea? Great idea? Yep, thank you. The naming of parks. Should the naming of parks be within the policy? Yes? Yep. Rob, you're looking undecided. Okay, so general feeling? Yep. Although we've got one dissenter, so that's all good. So the naming panel. the naming panel is currently sitting outside the policy. Do we want it integrated as part of the policy? Do we think that that's a good idea? Sorry, it's the panel currently. It's the terms of reference essentially. The makeup of the panel should be part of the policy. Is what am I interpreting?
No, that's not quite correct. So effectively, currently in the policy, we've got reference to that there is a panel, and we've got a reference to the decisions that they've got to make or that they're allowed to make. The composition of the panel sits outside in the terms of reference, and I think that is a better place because it allows us to adjust it over time without having to review the whole policy.
Sorry, actually, in terms of people, yes, but in terms of the sort of people or the backgrounds of the people.
At this stage, Section 4.2 of the policy deals with the naming panel. It only deals with the powers of the panel, or purpose of the panel, the powers of the powers of the panel. That's all that's all the policy deals with, and it's intentionally silent on the composition of the panel.
So the composition and the delegation. In other words, the terms of reference of the panel. I interpreted this submission topic 3 was about the integration of the terms of reference of the panel into the policy. Is that not correct?
It's partially correct. So if you have a look at in your attachment or in Diligent, there's a copy of the naming and numbering policy.
Yes, I've got that.
On page 2 of the naming and numbering policy, section 4.2, that deals with the matters, that deals with the panel as far as the parts of the panel that are in the policy. So that refers to the purpose of the panel, and the powers of the panel, and the decision-making process. Mm-hmm. Outside of the policy is the terms of reference. The terms of reference is where we set the composition of the panel. And that's also because that would invariably include, or eventually there will be a decision from or elected members about appointments or community appointments to the panel.
Okay. So,
Madam Chair, can I ask a question on that point?
Sorry, can I just finish? So what we're doing is adopting the terms of reference, not necessarily inserting them into which is effectively the same thing in practice.
Yes.
Good. Thank you, Josh.
So just to understand the distinction between the policy versus the terms of reference, if we were to review it, given that they're both being passed under a resolution. So if we wanted to review the terms of reference, what would that process look like once adopted?
To review the terms of reference would need to come to a committee, and the council would then make, or the appropriate committee would then make a decision on the terms of changes to the terms of reference through a normal council report. If you wish to amend the policy, you need to, you would probably trigger significance, so you would need to do engagement and consultation around that. It's more like there is a larger process involved in it.
Perfect.
Thank you. But a separate process is the message. All right. So let's get a little bit more granular about. No, firstly, I'm taking it that we generally think that terms of reference for the panel are a good idea. Yep. So let's talk about the specificities of those terms of reference.
Can we talk about the delegations first, because that might help you in considering who's on the panel?
Yes.
So can we just confirm that members are comfy with the panel making a recommendation to council on parks?
Yeah, let me lead this, but So yes, that's exactly what I was going to do next. So if we look at the top of page 21, page 21 of our normal papers, we've got the naming panel delegations. And you've got it at number 27, there's a list there of the naming of roads, new roads unformed, renaming, and then the naming of parks and reserves. And alongside that, there is a column that talks about where the panel make decisions and where they only have the delegated authority to make a recommendation up to council. All right, we're all on the same place? Cool. So, what are we thinking about the ability of the panel to make decisions for new roads and unformed roads? That is where things are at the moment. Josh?
I like it. I don't think councillors need to be in the weeds of making decisions about new roads, given that they're far less likely to be politically contentious or challenging, whereas a park is far more widely used by the whole community, potentially. And also the renaming of a road is likely to be a whole lot more contentious as well, potentially, and therefore the additional safeguard of having it being a recommendation from council or the relevant committee, to me makes sense from a governance perspective. But I'm happy to not be in the weeds of making a decision about new roads. I don't think it's necessary.
Does anybody else want to speak to that or ask a question about it?
Just to say that Justin was asked earlier about new roads, and he elaborated as to why it might be more localised or going into the road or whatever. And I accepted that as a clear explanation that they could make a decision, the panel could make a decision based on what Justin informed me and clarified all of us a few minutes ago. I'm happy with it.
So you're happy with it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Glenda?
Thank you. I agree with Josh. We don't want to be in the weeds of naming the roads when we've got a panel that will be that will have the ability to do that. I am thinking the renaming of roads. This is where I'm not quite in agreement with my colleague here on the right. But the renaming of roads, making a recommendation, I don't think that's that consistent when they are able to make a decision on new roads and unformed roads. So the renaming of roads should also follow. They should be able to make a decision on that. I can't see the correlation of why that needs to be different when they're already making a decision on new roads and unformed roads. Am I making sense?
Yes? Yeah, I understand you.
Yeah. So I would prefer that the renaming of roads is able to be a decision made by the panel.
Justin, he hasn't spoken to that.
What did you want to ask, Ross?
Justin respond to that? Why
Well,
that is in there?
Justin's here to answer questions, but not to actually get into the debate, unless there is a matter of fact that needs responding to. So, yeah. Well, did you have a question of clarification for Justin?
Use your microphone, please, Councillor.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure if Justin would be into debating, because all I'm asking for is background as to why the officers felt make a recommendation on renaming roads. I'm not sure that's debating directly against. It's kind of clarifying where the council is coming from.
Can you provide us with the rationale why officers have made the suggestion that the renaming of roads would just be a recommendation of that panel?
Through the chair, the panel process is designed to be by consensus. Now, I'm not saying that a renaming of the road would not be by consensus. However, there are probably going to be competing interests and views in that. The officer recommendation that the panel should be or make a recommendation to council is council's considered to be a much more appropriate place to weigh up different value sets in that space. and that's and because there's often competing values when it comes to naming or renaming of roads.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, I concur with what Justin's just said. You know, the renaming of a road can be highly contentious. You know, and I think that the public expect the council to make that decision, not and wouldn't quite recognise just a panel of council making that decision. I think we all need to have the opportunity of having our views heard on a matter that could arise.
On a renaming of
on
a
a
road.
renaming of a road.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Charlotte?
I just concur. I think Councillor Josh actually put it quite well that the reasons for a road needing to be renamed could be very simple and non-political, but in some cases it could be, as Councillor Rob has said, very contentious. And I think that the safeguarding of putting that political lens from the council could be helpful in some cases.
Okay, good discussion. Is that the kind of general feel of the room, that renaming of roads would be best left as a recommendation rather than a decision? Is that just... Yep. All right, thank you. So can we just talk about the naming of parks and reserves?
Can I ask a question?
In the papers
first?
there, just let me finish,
Yeah.
Philippa. Just both recommendations, that the panel would make recommendations up to council in regard to a new park naming and a renaming of a park. Is your question in relation to this particular item?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, it's just in regard to, parks and reserves, new parks, renaming. And, you know, we're all thinking, I don't know, Lead Park and Wembley Park and, you know, it's big parks, you know, new big parks or something, or parks. Don't have to be big, but what about, does that include things like possible walkways and, you know, that are in areas of park and reserve? Yeah, I like...
So that's the question?
Yeah, there are those types of walkways. I could mention mine, which I knew nothing about. I wasn't on council when I read it in the paper. And so many years ago, for example, I don't know whether, but I think there's opportunities in that space for people and that might be associated with, I'm thinking in the sporting space, other people, you know, for example, and is that an opportunity, you know, that we might say we've got some great rugby player, which we have, and we might go, oh gosh, there's Cook's Gardens and there's Spriggans, but there may be other opportunities, well, you know, I can't specifically think, but I just want to know, because we just kind of think, and is that...
So does it include more than parks?
Yeah.
And every other thing around town that could be named?
Great, I think we have a ball doing this.
Through the chair, no, it only relates to or parks and reserves. Basically, open green spaces as opposed to walkways or other things like that within a green space.
So where do they fit in though? Where do we go to if we have, you know, when we're in that, to consider that type of space?
The size and nature of some of those vary greatly. So the question, or in order to leave some of that flexibility around that decision making about how we might name some of those other pieces of linear infrastructure that we might have, or other places, that leaving it outside of the policy gives council flexibility around that, and means that you don't have to follow a more prescriptive process.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, cool. Right, have we got that recommendations for parks would be the right thing for the panel to be doing, not making decisions, but making recommendations? Yep. Is that the general thing? Thank you. The yips have it. Then can we move on to composition of the naming panel? So currently we've got one elected member, not currently, the draft here has one elected member, 2 community representatives, up to 4 iwi or hapu representatives, and the way it's drafted is that the developer and one planning officer are both on the panel but have no voting rights. At the same time, the suggestion's been made, and I understand this is how it's working now, that it works on a consensus basis, which is pretty much diametrically opposed to having voting and non-voting rights, in my view. So what would you think if everybody on that panel had the ability to input to a decision, so that both the developer and the planning officer had the ability to persuade the decision? Is that to both? Justin, do you want to?
May I just make a suggestion that if you've got an elected member there, that you probably don't need the planning officer having voting they can be in their support role, but they don't need those voting or necessary or rights as such.
Okay, so just the developer? What's the thoughts? Should the developer have voting rights on this panel?
No.
Glenda, do you
Thank you. I think they should, but like you said, it's by consensus anyway. So is it, I think they should be able to have voting rights.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well,
Glenda?
I think they, if you're talking about, sorry, can you explain to me? It'll be the developer of. Is it one developer on the naming panel? One only.
It will be the developer that's bringing forward the names. So, for example, if you had a developer doing a subdivision, the road needed to be named within that. They would be the representative of that.
Yep.
If it was unformed road being named, it would actually be our council's roading team as part of that.
Right. Okay. So that makes it quite a bit clearer. The developer has an intrinsic part of the development, and has done for the last however long it takes. They're not having the decision. They're part of a panel that will come to a consensus. So I'm not able to understand why a developer would be included in the conversation but not have a voting right. I think they should. Could you please give me could I please have the rationale for why a developer does not have, it is suggested that the developer does not have voting rights?
Through the chair, at this stage, the recommendation was not to, or to have speaking but not voting rights, was because one of the concerns is that if the broader panel considered the name but didn't consider it appropriate, a developer might say, well, I'm only going to agree to one particular name to be basically put forward as part of this. That was one of the concerns, that potentially in terms of process, that you might then end up having to take every single or that decision back up to council because the panel wasn't making a final call, but able to reach a consensus with that. That is one of the things to consider. Or having said that, the developer typically is required to put forward 3 names.
Yes.
So that does provide some flexibility.
Thank you. So just to follow on from that, because the decision is made by consensus, then a developer doesn't have the right to demand that their suggestion is taken anyway, because it's a decision made by consensus. So I'm not sure the reason for that is. Am I asking a question or am I saying?
No, I think we get it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ross,
Yeah,
only on this subject.
I am.
Good man.
Thank you. I would support that a developer would have voting rights, It's not a problem, and I might be overruled. I support a developer having voting rights. What if the vote is tied in a particular situation? Is that something to discuss further down?
That's consensus. They generally, a consensus decision in my book is where you have to get to a place where everyone can live with the decision.
So you have to leave the
There is-
room with a decision.
Yes.
Through the chair, where the policy basically says that where and in terms of reference also reference it, where consensus can't be reached or is chosen not to be reached, that it would, or that decision would or come to council. It would allow for dissenting view, or if there wasn't agreement as well.
Rob?
Yeah, and Kate, you said about the composition of the panel before. I don't see that written in the papers anywhere, is it?
It's the first item of the references that follow on.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's not right at the back, it's about page, sorry, it might not be the first one. It's page 30 of the references.
Okay.
And, we'll move on. This is, can we just deal to the matter of whether a developer should have
Yes.
a voting right? So you're thinking yes?
Sorry, I was responding to what you said. No, I have a different view to Councillor Glenda. I think that the interests of the developer have to be balanced with the broader interest of the community, and that the developer already has a arguably greater level of influence than the remainder of the community by dint of the fact that they get to submit, I think it's 3 names, as part of the process. And therefore, the developer not having voting rights while still being able to participate gives the panel that layer of objectivity that might not exist otherwise. And so I'm happy with the recommendation.
Thank you, Josh. Charlotte?
I'm in the same boat. I think that the opportunity for the developer to present 3 options of names is a spectacular opportunity. I think that there is already financial benefit to the developer in developing the area or the piece of land already, and I think that removing the voting right from the developer and handing the vote over to the panel ensures that integrity remains in the name. I'm really happy with the way that the wording is drafted.
Okay.
I'm happy with the recommendation.
Thank you. Michael?
The arguments put forward so far just make me uncomfortable with anti-developer rhetoric. There's no reason why the developer can't be on the panel. Every argument that's been put forward could be said the same thing for every community member. And Glenda, yeah, I agree. It's kind of funny. But what I would say is to point...
Can I actually just point of order that?
You can point of order at which number? Yeah, exactly. So anyway...
It's misrepresentation.
It's not misrepresentation.
Excuse me.
Sorry, Chair, go for it.
Michael, just be careful with how you're presenting.
You can throw me out if you want.
Thank you. That's all right. Start
Question,
again.
if I give you 3 names as a developer, do you have to choose those 3 names? Or did you normally do it? Because there's nothing in the policy I can find that you have to do it.
The developer has the option to provide up to 3 names. There have been situations where a name or where the name put forward was not considered to be appropriate, so therefore there was a discussion with the developer and the naming panel provided, hey, these might be some alternatives that we are considering. What are your views on this?
Does that help, Michael? Yeah, I'm a bit torn on this one. I'm hearing it implied that developers would not have integrity about the names, and I don't think that that is necessarily the case. Yeah, not at all.
And I would love to clarify that at no point did I suggest that developers in this town don't have integrity. But I did suggest that it is possible. And at no point did I suggest that I am anti-developers or development.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying. What's the feeling? Are we thinking that developers should have voting rights or not in the naming panel? No, just come on, I got years and nahs before. What are we thinking?
One developer and how many others? 3, 4, 5?
Yeah, look, I'm going to suggest to you that we leave it to the wisdom of the group to sort if there is a developer that is fixated on one name and they can't get to a place. You know, I think we need to trust the panel. So I'm suggesting, and you can vote me down if you like, that a developer would have the opportunity to vote on this issue, remembering that there are a potential of 7 other people involved in this process, plus a council officer. It won't be 7 though, will it? What's it like? Well, up to 7.
Up to 7. It's unlikely to be 7. You're probably going to, on average, you'll have an elected member, 2 community reps, 2 iwi, because it doesn't usually get more than that, and then that ends up, or plus the developer, so that's about 5, or that's 6, sitting at around 6.
Yeah. You know, Josh made a really good case. That said, developers are vested in these places. You know, they care. You know, and one person as a group of 6, you know, and the ability that if you can't get consensus, then it gets kicked back to council. You know, there is an escalation clause there. So I would rather, as I say, trust the wisdom of the group. But I don't want to overcook this. Tell me if you disagree, because that is probably the recommendation that I'm going to put up. But I need to do it in such a way that we're going to get past. Also, I'm going to have to peel back and just deal with this item as a separate resolution.
I'll maintain my current stance, but I'm happy to take that to a vote. That's fine.
So that's not giving me direction from everybody about how to proceed here. All right, we'll take a straw poll.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Are we discussing, as well as the developer, are we discussing the rest of the composition of the panel?
Shall we go on to that next, Rob?
Okay. Well, it's relative, really, to whether the developer has a vote or not.
Now, I'm scared if we peel off into another subject, we might just end up doubling up. So just park that for now. Jenny might have this wonderful question that's going to resolve the whole issue.
So erudite. So the bylaw, no, it's a policy. The policy is up for review when? We pass it imminently and it's up for review when?
The policy does not have an express review date. Typically, you review the policies every 5 years, depending on the content. However, we can bring it forward if it was deemed to be necessary.
Yeah, I guess that's my point. If we have like a rogue developer who insists on wanting to enforce names that we, the collective community, don't think are appropriate, we can review the policy.
The thing is, I don't think you would need to, because the process would happen if you had developer with voting or had decision making power as part of the consensus, and the other parts of the panel did not agree with that. What would happen is that the panel would be unable to make a decision on that, because you would have 2 different points of view. that the reasons for those would be recorded, and the decision would come up to council to make a final call on it, and then council would be the decision maker in that situation. So you wouldn't need to review the policy to do that. If you wanted to review the terms of reference, that could be reviewed or it's up for, or suggested that it's reviewed after 3 years.
But it could come back any time,
Correct.
quite easily.
Yeah, because I disagree with your, very politely, I disagree with the way you've framed that, because there are other ways in which a developer could have, a strong personality, dominant in the community, all that kind of thing, dominant in the room. But I think we're kind of looking now very deeply for issues that maybe don't exist. But what I'm hearing is, if there is an issue, we can actually deal with it in a fundamental way by changing the policy, if we need to.
You would change the terms of reference, not the policy, and that's why we've done the policy of the terms of reference like we have.
Okay, so I'm going to park that just for now, just that particular issue about the ability of the developer to vote, and come back to Rob's question about the rest of the composition of the committee.
First of all,
Mic on, please, Rob.
the 4 iwi hapu representatives, what does this mean? It says up to 4, and then the note is that if the area of interest is by more than 1 iwi, it could have a representative from Tupou, Tamu, Pako, Ngararu and Ngāti Apa, whichever, and they have voting rights. So there could be 4 iwi sitting at the meeting. 4 members from iwi sitting at the meeting, is that right?
Through the chair, for any one particular decision, you would, or the iwi would have to be within their area of interest or rohe. For example, so typically that would end up being up to 2 iwi, because if you think where Ngāti or Tamapuko often has interest in the whole of the Whanganui main urban area, but then you've got Ngāti Apa coming down to the Whanganui River, and you've also got Ngāti also coming on or through from the western side as well. So it kind of depends where it is, but typically you won't have more than 2 with a specific interest in it.
So if there was a new street to be named, say, at the Fitzherbert Avenue where all the new developments going in, how would you approach iwi on that one? It would be just Tupou, wouldn't it?
Ngāti or Ngāti also have interest in that top end or that Springvale as well. So that's how we would deal with it.
And what is the rationale for just having 1 elected member again?
That is for members to consider the benefit. At this stage, having an elected member allows for some political input from councillors into that broader naming panel. Previously, the mayor, when it was first established, the mayor had a role in that panel, but with a new term of council, the mayor was ceased to be part of that. So there's pros and cons both ways in terms of elected member input. It also allows, if it had to come up to council, for that member to speak to the discussions that were had, or as well potentially. But it's for members to consider.
Ross, did you have a question?
Oh, I do. It sounds odd because this is a very engaged conversation. If I may, to Justin, how often, a subdividing operator or not, do we need to name a road? How often does this occur for us to deal with it? In the last 18 months or so, there have been 3 meetings for naming roads. So it's about once a quarter, sometimes a little bit more than that.
for other periods, you can go 12 months, 18 months without needing one of these meetings because there aren't any new roads or of the like being named.
Okay, folks, I think we need to wrap this up. We've gone through it in quite a lot of detail. I need your guidance here a little bit, Justin. My interpretation of what we've discussed and kind of generally agreed is pretty much as drafted. The terms of reference are as drafted, except for the issue of whether the developer gets to vote on a name or not. Am I correct there?
The other question is also whether or not the planning officer is part of that or as part of that as well.
My interpretation, or reading the meeting, was that got dropped off earlier on, that it was just for the developer. Yes?
So in the actual terms of reference that we're reading on that page 2 of terms of reference, the membership will consist of one planning officer non-voting. So that would stay as that? That's my understanding? Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Well, we haven't landed on the developer bit yet. But pretty much the rest of it we're accepting as drafted. Yeah? Yeah. So what's the recommendation at the revoke? Adopts the terms of reference. So it's either as drafted or with alterations.
Through the chair, may I make a suggestion that we just include those membership or include the membership in the in D, just to make it clear about the membership. And if you give us a couple of minutes, we can just get that drafted and we can put that on the screen, so it's very clear about what people are actually agree or what people are or what members are agreeing to. Other than that, I think that the decisions that have been made, the indications that have been made through this process so far are effective or reflect the recommendations and that are sitting there in the recs.
So what I'll do, we'll take a pause, adjourn the meeting for a few minutes. We'll take items A through C, and then we'll put D up separately. That will include the voting rights of a developer, and if that fails, then we'll go to the next option, and that will be the panel without voting rights of the developer. All right, this meeting's adjourned. The recommendation, is Michael coming back? So we've got a recommendation as drafted, except we have amended D. So I propose that I move the recommendations as we've got up there, and I'll read them if I've got a seconder. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Ross. So if we could go back up. Can we have that? Yeah, it will be. So the recommendation is that the committee adopts all decisions made during deliberations and that they will be incorporated into a final naming and numbering policy. B, that adopts the road naming and numbering policy with a commencement date of the 4th of June 2024. C, revoke the road naming and numbering policy 2018 upon the commencement of the naming and numbering policy. Adopts the terms of reference Whanganui naming and numbering panel supported by a council officer and with the following panel membership: 1 elected member being the chair, voting rights, 2 community representatives that have been supported and endorsed by council with voting rights, up to 4 iwi or hapu representatives with voting rights, and 4 the developer or a developer's representative with voting rights. And recommendation E is that we revoke the terms of reference Whanganui road naming panel. So I'm going to put
No,
the
Madam Chair, I want to move an amendment, please.
No, we don't. Which is the amendment relate to, Rob?
I want to alter D1 to 2 elected members.
Do you have a seconder for that amendment? Is there a seconder for that amendment? No seconder. Thanks, Rob. So what I propose is to put A through, can you scroll up again, please? A through C, and then we will take D and E. Well, I think we'll take D and then we'll take E, because we'll only revoke if D passes. All right, so all those in favour of no, sorry, we're going to speak to it. Does anybody want to speak to recommendations 4.2 A through C? No speakers?
Yes, I want to speak, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Rob?
Yes, A through to C.
That's
Okay.
right.
So,
Thought you might. Mike?
I have
Michael.
a little blip.
This is just A through C. The composition of the panel will be dealt with at D.
Yeah, I struggled with this policy quite a bit last night, and trying to understand if we are moving forward with this policy or going backwards. I have come to the conclusion that we are moving forward. I don't like top-down control of cultural dynamics, and I feel like this policy does do that. We are telling our people how they should name things, and that moves a lot faster culturally than what this committee would always do and what policies would do. However, the inclusion of more options, I think, is a good thing. I am completely going blank on everything else, so that's basically what I'll say. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Michael. Any further speakers? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? One abstention. Rob? So the next... Do you want to finish your bit? Yeah, we've moved the suite of them. I'm just putting them to you separately. So, recommendations D, that we adopt the terms of reference as I read out previously. It's been moved and seconded. Does anybody want to speak to this? Glenda.
Thank you. I'll definitely support this. I think with it, the biggest change is a developer or developer's representative has voting rights. I just think that this makes complete sense when we're in a group where there's going to be at least 4 or 5 people, 6, maybe 7, and all of their decisions will be made via consensus. So I think that it's a good thing that the developer is part of the group. They get to engage in the conversation and they get to have a vote as well. We did talk earlier about maybe the developer or the developer's representative might be quite vocal or quite forceful or dominant. That could be said the same for any of the members. So I'm very happy with this, very happy to support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenda. Ross, Rob, then Michael.
Thank you. I also support this. I just want to state that in 4.2D3, Roman numeral 3, up to 4 iwi hapu representatives, I was a bit nervous when I read that literally, but in the terms of reference, it explains the situation where it may need to go to up to 4 representatives. So because the terms of reference covers that blank statement, I'm very happy with it.
Thank you, Ross. Rob?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to vote against this D. I'm doing so because I don't think the balance is right on this composition of this panel. You know, when we are elected as representatives of the community, we are, in my opinion, here to make decisions. The community expect us to make decisions. And here we've got a situation where we're going to play a very minor role in the naming of streets in the future, if this is adopted. The comeback from the community is to the elected members. It's not to a panel. We're the ones who bear the brunt of it from the community if a decision is made which hasn't got widespread support, or if there's any criticism to be made, it comes back to us as councillors. Consequently, I resist any moves that devolves from the responsibility of councillors to the decisions to be made outside this room. And while I understand that part of this recommendation, this policy is that it makes recommendations, the actual naming of streets rests with this panel solely. So that's my reasons for voting against this. I repeat, it's because the balance isn't right. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Michael?
I do actually agree with my colleague on this, that the balance isn't right. However, in my view, I'll be voting for this because I believe that it's never going to be quite right. If I had a view, I could change it. There'd be 3 people in a room, a developer, a local hapu. I wouldn't go iwi, I'd go hapu, and then 1 community member, like a neighbour. It'd be different people every time, it'd be dynamic, it'd be cool, and it would be consensus. But that requires an amendment, and I don't think with 3 meetings in 18 months, thank you, Councillor Fallon, for that question. That was really enlightening, actually. It doesn't seem worthy to do. The only thing I would put is I would like to see more hapu representation as opposed to iwi. The local community members should change depending on the community it's involved with. I agree with Rob in the fact that we are the community members. So you've effectively got 3 community members up on that board. I just don't want it to turn into a bureaucracy where there's 9 people in a room shouting about a road name, because if it was my choice, it would be an AI determining the road names and we wouldn't need it at all. But I really want to appreciate that developers have artistic and design criteria for their streets that they develop in, so they should definitely have a view and a vote to influence for that. So I'm very happy with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Jenny?
Thank you. I think that elected members already play a minor role in this activity, and I think that is right. The community certainly doesn't need elected members' fingers in every pie, and our attention should be given to the bigger issues, and we shouldn't be dwelling down at this level very much at all. And a number of the decisions are going to come to us anyway. These are just voting to get to a recommendation in many of the cases. And I think we should just get on with it.
Thank you, Jenny. Josh, then Philippa.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to vote against this as well for reasons that I've stated previously, but just to address the elected member representation issue. As I said, I don't think we need to be in the weeds of new names. I think that the policy is really well crafted in the sense that there is a safeguard in the event that the panel cannot reach a conclusion where it's escalated up to elected members. But I don't want us to be spending our time not endlessly, but debating the naming of new roads. I think that we've got a really good solution here in that respect. I am going to vote against it because, as I've said previously, I believe that the balance was right in terms of the recommendation from officers that developers are able to influence the process by submitting the names or suggested names. They are able to attend the panel and argue however strongly for them, but there is also that layer of broader objectivity that comes from having a panel that perhaps assesses the broader situation. So I'm going to vote against it for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Philippa?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, what Josh has said in regards to I'm comfortable with this. I'm comfortable with one elected member. I think it's really important there is an elected member there, and you know, that's a process the Mayor, I gather, would be going through. Someone that's really interested in this, and you know, is going to, as we all would, work collaboratively with a group of people. But you know, we also get the right to endorse those two community representatives, obviously, and obviously iwi and hapu should have their own on their own right, without us putting anything over that. Yeah, I mean, the developer one is an interesting one, but I am putting my my judgment and respect and support for them to with all the everything that you know, with everything that the developers go through, and financially and all the planning around it, that they should. You know, I would nearly question whether they would be prepared to turn up just to have speaking rights, not voting rights. So I'd prefer they're there having a vote. I also just think you know, that it is, if we go back to the naming, you know, a little bit on the previous recommendations, you know, this panel was just making decisions on new roads, unformed roads, and it is council where they need to put a recommendation through to council with the renaming of roads, new parks, renaming of parks, and I think we have an opportunity there, as I kind of asked the question, to look at other opportunities that don't necessarily fit just within a full park, but to look for, you know, we don't want to necessarily name every little bit of verge after somebody, but I think there's, what we heard is there's opportunities to look at other that don't fall in this policy, to acknowledge some significant people through our history in various ways, and other ways. So I'm going to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to support this recommendation, but I'm not going to speak to it necessarily. I think you're already clear on what my views are. So we'll take a show of hands, please. All those in favour of D, please raise their hands. You got it. All those against? The motion is carried. Thank you. So we'll put E up, that revokes the terms of reference from the Whanganui Road Naming Panel. That's the previous panel terms of reference. That's been moved and seconded. Does anybody want to speak to this item? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. You want to abstain on E? Right, one abstention. All right, thank you. Right, we're on to item 4.3, deliberations for the traffic and speed limits bylaw. Welcome, Damien. Right, Damien, you've been sitting there watching how this meeting's rolling. We're going to no, you had to stay, didn't you, Damien? Yeah, we're going to have a fairly relaxed approach to question time, especially if we need to get very nuanced around the recommendations that we've got before us. So welcome. Those are the recommendations as drafted. Last minute changes that you've made? Is there? So do you want to make that clear up front? What the changes are? Yeah, I'll talk through the changes. Put your mic on, please, Damien.
I'll talk through the changes as I go through. I'll get onto it fairly promptly in my presentation. Okay. Okay. So the council, as a road controlling authority, is responsible for the setting of safe and appropriate speed limits within the Whanganui district. The council consulted the community about the proposed changes to the traffic and speed limits bylaw from the 20th of February to the 20th of March. The council received a total of 146 submissions on this. The proposed changes included speed limit reductions around schools and on local roads within the district, speed limit reductions and formalisation of other speed limits at various other locations within the district. The submissions in general were in favour of the proposed changes. I draw the elected members' attention to the attachments that I have included, which one of substantial interest is the government, through Minister Simeon Brown's announcement that they are reviewing the speed limit setting rule at some point in time this year, noting that there is no legislation currently on the table or no policies on the table by the government. It is purely an indication of some time in the future. That brings me to clarification around one of the recommendations that has changed from the original paper, where in the original paper we sought deferral of Table A, which is the speed limits around schools. The amendment is reflected in the recommendation and relates to information obtained since the writing of the report. Following discussions with the policy and legal team, the original recommendation has been reworded to include the adoption of tables A, B and C, rather than the delayed adoption of table A. The reason for this is the government does not currently have a piece of legislation drafted or any policy drafted or out for consultation. The traditional approach from council, the traditional approach is for council to not look at implementing policies or bylaws when legislation is drafted. In this case, there is only a government announcement with no fixed dates for implementation or consultation. In the announcement on the 21st of March 24, the Minister is quoted as saying, "The new rule will ensure that when speed limits are set, economic impacts, including travel times and the views of road users and local communities, are taken into account alongside road safety." The Council has undertaken an assessment of the proposed changes around schools and has considered the impact on travel times, given the locations of schools and the proposed combined use of both permanent and variable speed limits based on road status. Both the economic impacts and effects on travel times are considered less than minor. The Council has undertaken a robust public consultation process and has listened to the views of road users and the local community. The support shown for change has been substantially in favour of the document of the proposed bylaw change. Through the process, the Council has had a commitment to ensuring the safety of our most vulnerable citizens, making road safety a top priority. The Council has not taken a blanket approach to the setting of the speed limits, rather a targeted and sensible position where economic impacts, travel times, community views and road safety are all considered. Those are reflected in the proposed bylaw. Officers are confident that the proposed changes to the traffic and speed limits bylaw are consistent with the government's announcement and future direction. I'll pause to take any questions on that because it is quite a substantial change.
Yeah, I'm going to get you to paraphrase it. Just tell us again, because what we're hearing is that Table A, which is about the school limits, the speed limits around schools, was to be deferred. Adoption of that was to be deferred until later in the year, but because of the status of the Minister's comments, we're taking a different approach from what is in our papers.
If it's okay, I might jump in here.
Yes, please.
Just to add a little bit more nuance to the situation. So, as Damien said, the earlier resolution did have Table A, which is the school table, excluded on the basis of the recent announcements from the Minister and around the uncertainty of the rule. So since he has tabled that, General Counsel Rob, myself and Damien have met to discuss this, and there's a few reasons why we have made the changed resolution or brought the changed resolution to you today. The first one is what Damien outlined, that the Minister has certainly said that the rule will be reviewed and given an indication that blanket speed limits will not be in the rule. However, we don't have much more than that to go on. So as you said, we don't have a piece of draft legislation or a draft policy or proposal or anything out for consultation. This rule will be going out for consultation later this year, but at this stage we don't have a piece of paper to look at. The other reason is because we actually think, looking at what we've done, we're not imposing blanket rules, and we have done thorough community engagement, which is strongly in support of the changes, that we suspect we will actually be aligned with whatever the new rule is that the government brings in, because we've got no reason to think that our approach that we've taken is not entirely sensible and good practice. So we think we've done a good process. It would be unusual for the government to then bring in a rule that would then make our process not appropriate. Of course, they have the ability to do that. So where this really comes down to is And I think maybe what we do, I'll do my spiel and then we'll maybe let Damien run through each question with you. So you've got the community input and actually sort of have a bit more detail on what you're actually considering. And then maybe we come back to that. Would that be okay? Yeah. So I'll finish my bit, which is where I think we're at, is you've probably got three choices. Choice one, which is where we've landed as officers, is proceed as we are. Proceed as we are. Adopt the proposal, effective from 1st of July this year, but phase in any implementation so that no signage or costs are borne immediately where there may be risk that speed limits will be overturned. So send that clear direction. We've heard the community. However, we don't want to, as you'll see in the article from Tauranga, there's concern around ratepayer money and spending ratepayer money on initiatives that may be overturned. So of course, we want to avoid that. So that's option one. Option two is we just wait. So we just put everything on ice today around Table A, and we just wait to see what happens with the rule. And there's risks around that, but there may be benefits because then you'll have more clarity around where that's landing. Option three is we just do nothing at all and throw this whole thing out, which I don't think anyone thinks is appropriate. It was certainly not based on the feedback. So that leaves you really with option one or two. And I think it comes down to what risk you are willing to take. And I would love to have a crystal ball, but I don't. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen. And we operate in this environment every day. You know, central government can at any point, as we know, overturn legislation or make decisions that will impact on the decisions that we have made as local councils. So really it's up to you. I would say that the risk of proceeding as we are is that potentially some of these decisions could be overturned. I think that can be mitigated by the phase-in of implementation. So you would still have a cost of coming back through council in terms of procedural cost, staff time, but you would minimise costs in terms of signage and whatnot. And the risks of waiting are, well, we don't know what it will be. The risk of proceeding is we may have to modify the consultation again. The bylaw may be revoked altogether. So you'll remember that we've decided to consult under our bylaw rather than the rule, as the rule was actually repealed. So we may lose our bylaw in the future and it may revert to a national scheme. And the risk of waiting is also we may have to modify and consult again because by the time, if we're sitting there just waiting, by the time we know the outcome, we may then have to run a completely different process. So the best case outcome is our approach is aligned with the new rule and we can transition over to that without any further changes, cost or consultation needed. So that is ultimately what we're recommending, but the decision is up to you.
So, questions. It's a bit of a big change, but please ask some questions. Oh, Glenda.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, can you, and it might be in here somewhere, so apologies in advance. These proposed changes, are they for 24/7 as far as the time is concerned, or is it during drop-off and pick-up?
So we're talking about Table A.
Table A, sorry, yes.
There's a combination of both permanent posted speed signs and variable signs. And it is based on the location as to which sign has been deemed most appropriate. Now that assessment in the first instance was done through our traffic safety engineer, and those are the recommendations that have been carried forward.
So have you got the table in front of you, Damien? Would you just like to illustrate with a couple of examples? Perhaps with Faith City School. That's permanent with VMS signs on Springvale Road. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so for Faith City School, Springvale Road, everyone knows that's a really busy road. It's one of our main collectors. That would have VMS signage, which is similar to what you would see if you go past Moston School or Westmere School, where at key pick-up and drop-off times, the speed limit there is reduced to 30 kilometres per hour. Outside of those times, it returns to the normal operating speed of posted speed of 50 kilometres per hour. Other examples in the plan are around the likes of St Dominic's on Elmer Road, York Street, where again a variable speed sign is applied during the hours of pick-up and drop-off and posted variable signs are there for 30k during pick-up and drop-off, and outside of that it returns to a normal operating speed of 50 kilometres per hour. Example where the variable signs haven't been used, for example, Portal Street outside Jury Hill School. That's a situation where there's already traffic calming measures in play there. Anyone that's driven that recently will realise that the capability to drive through there at more than 30 kilometres per hour is pretty limited now that there's a raised platform and traffic calming measures there. So 30 kilometres per hour is appropriate is appropriate at all times outside that school. That school's got a unique situation, and they also have a community pool, so during summer months in particular, the number of students present or young people present in that area is quite high anyway, so having the permanent speed reduced there is suitable in that situation. Another example would be Fordell, where the school there is on a quiet rural back street. The decision and what we consulted on was the 30 kilometre per hour permanent posted speed limit there.
Thank you. Did you have another question?
I did. Thank you for that. Upakanaru School isn't featured on this table, and I know that I don't think it was before, but we did have a very compelling submission from the principal. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us what's happening with that.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Upakanaru School doesn't feature on this table, and I don't think that it ever has been listed down here during the process, but they did give a very compelling submission by the principal recently, so I'm just wondering if you could explain what's happening with that.
Yeah, can I take any of the questions relating to the inclusion of Table A, and I will go into detail on Upakanaru School, Kaiwi School, Carlton School, and the other submissions that relate to schools on state highways.
Yeah. Cool. I will just ask a follow-up question to Glenda's first questions. Would it be fair for us to assume that in each of Table A, you have gone through on a case-by-case basis and made a decision or made a recommendation to us that where there's a variable sign there should be, and where there's a permanent one, there you have a rationale that supports that permanent status of the speed reduction, namely that there is community often gathering around that place, or there are speed calming, like speed bumps there that would preclude you from going from the higher speed. Is that a correct interpretation, Damien?
Yeah, that's fair.
Thank you. Rob?
Thank you. Just some more questions on this then. The sign that has the drop-off times and the pick-up times, you've got one of those, and then you've got ones without that. Now, on the maps that are on here, some schools have got both of those there. So, how does that work, Damien?
Have you got an example there, Rob?
Aranui. Aranui has both signs to be used, and it's got the area in front of the school with coloured red, then it's got side streets with blue on.
Yep, there's two different zones there. If you look at the diagram, one's set as a permanent reduction and the other's set as a at key time reductions.
So the red is permanent, 24/7, 30 Ks. And I'm on page 111. But it goes right through these. Doesn't seem to be very many
Rob,
that have
Rob,
the...
could you just pause there and allow Damien time to answer?
The red, according to that table, is the electronic controlled zone. The purple is the permanent speed limit.
So why, in that example, does it go down... I can't read what the names of these streets are, but you've got these side streets that go right down, and what is this logic? I can understand 30k outside schools, great, but all the streets that are leading onto it, what's the logic in having those 30k's as well?
The demarcation there is between the difference in signs. So on the Aranui sign, you can see that the wording, there is wording from the approved science manual from NZTA depicting what that wording says. So it limits, it's to try and reduce the cost of VMS boards, which are exponentially larger than standard signs, and use them in the situations where the NZTA rules permit us to use them.
So in Jerry Hill School, for instance, Burt's Lane, which is up past the school and goes off that way, that's all 30k's. What? I just don't understand the need for that. Kids aren't getting on and off or arriving and departing in Burt's Lane. And then it's 24/7. They've got a 30k in their street for 24/7. And this applies all over the place. I just look at St John's Hill. Aiken Road is 30k's.
Yeah, well, let's just unpick that a little bit, Rob. So if you're talking about Aiken Road, I mean, there are speed bumps there where you wouldn't be doing 50k's anyway. So it comes back to the question that I've just asked of Damien. They have gone through, officers have gone through each of these schools, and either there are physical reasons why 50k is not appropriate, like traffic calming, or it is a gathering point for more than school hours. Yeah?
Well,
I can't add much more than that.
Have a look at page 131, St Marcelin and Tawhero. There's blue lines everywhere there.
Well, again, there's speed bumps outside the school along
Outside the school,
Tawhero
yes.
Street.
Outside the school, but what about the streets that are coming onto it? What's the logic there? There's no speed bumps there. And you talk about Aiken Road. The only speed bumps in Aiken Road are outside the gate to the school.
Another thing that I have heard, Damien.
Sorry, Charlotte. Damien, do you want to respond to?
Yeah, I can.
Just reiterate what you've already said about how council officers have got to the advice that's before us.
At the heart of the decision-making process is safe and appropriate speed limits around these environments, and what has been presented on and what has been consulted on is a represented view of safe and appropriate speed limits. I will take the opportunity to advance where I was going to talk about as I go through the items. The proposal has got overwhelming support from the community to implement these changes. They are based on sound engineering advice and traffic safety. They are to protect the most vulnerable and one only has to look at the number of complaints we get from the public about speeding vehicles and requests to implement traffic calming and lower speed limits to see that those views are reflected in the submission process.
Did you have another question, Rob?
Yes, Madam Chair, I can understand that the public would say 30 k's is a good
This
good
is not a
idea.
debate, this is a question
Yeah,
time.
yeah. But that still doesn't
No
give
buts.
me a reason for these particular streets.
You're debating, Rob.
And I'll
Rob,
come to... Yeah.
You are debating.
hang on, I'll
Ask
get-
a question.
Yeah, well, give us a chance. St John's Hill School, Peaks Road, is 24/7, 30k. Now, that's going to cause a few problems.
You are debating, you're not asking questions.
You tell me why Peaks Road justifies being 30 k's for in that particular area, 24/7, 9 o'clock at night, school holidays.
Rob, you can stop there. Damien has already answered the question more than once about why this advice is in front of you. That's enough.
It doesn't
Thank you.
apply to that there because there's no speed bumps in Peaks Road.
It's not just the speed bumps, but I'm not arguing with you about it. Please, if you've got another question, ask it or turn your mic off. Michael, do you have a question? We can come
Table
back to you if
A.
you like. Yep.
We were talking about Table A. Table A, that's right, money. If we were to go forward today with the changes, the implementation wouldn't be immediate. With the timing, what is the sunk cost that we may be looking? I know you can't answer that 100%, but thumbsuck, right? Are we going to lose a lot of money, or can we push back at the implementation a few months? What's your recommendation there?
There's funding within the LTP budget to undertake signage and traffic calming measures. I think I can respond better to that as I talk through the submission questions, and if we need to come back to that, I'm certainly happy to come back to that in terms of a thumbs up.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to that next, but two more questions around Table A. Philippa and Ross.
I don't know this is necessarily Table A, but just...
This is Table A questions, and then we'll go back to the submissions, and you can bring up your question later. We've already got one parked around the NZTA roads.
Have we got... Sorry, this might be... But...
Table A, Philippa.
Table A.
Can you tell I'm getting
Are
cranky?
the police in tune with all this, and do we know where things might... In regard to policing this, have we had any feedback there? Yes.
We did not receive a submission as part of the process from New Zealand Police, and I can't speak to their position on this.
Thanks, Damien. Ross.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Is it correct for me to make this interpretation in Table A that in the last column it talks about the long-term plan 24 to 27? So over a 3 or 4 year period, there's about 35 places where the speed will be reduced, and some of them are quite dramatic because they are 100 to 30 k's for rural schools. That's a dramatic shift. But my point is, this is over a 3 year period or so, so it's not like it's all we're going to spend all this money by the end of this year and have all the signage done. It will take some time, correct?
Yeah, this funding proposed for the long-term plan that we're currently out for consultation on. That's one of the projects that's in there under the roading activity. The time frame was provided in there as a LTP period. We would roll, given that it's for areas affecting vulnerable citizens, we would look to roll that out as promptly as we could afford to do so.
Right, and second part of that question is, it's not for me to push for a particular school, rural or urban. Is it appropriate for me to make an assumption that when you schedule this, however you may schedule it, will you be giving priority as first stop to these rural schools where the speed limit is dramatically reduced? Are they high on the list before the urban schools? How do you schedule it? Which ones come first?
That's a piece of work that we'll need to do some more work on. It's a piece of work in itself. But there needs to be in terms of our rollout, we will have a robust rationale, certainly targeting higher priority sites first, using things like what I'll talk about later in my presentation around the crash analysis system that what Kotahi or NZTA has.
All right, so perhaps you might like to go back to the original presentation, given that we needed that update around the approach or the advice we've been given about Table A.
Cool. Okay, so I'll step into Councillor Glenda's question regarding NZTA. So through the submissions in the hearing process, elected members read and heard from the community about a number of issues with speed limits and road safety on State Highway network passing through Wanganui, State Highway 3 from the south heading towards Taranaki, and State Highway 4 towards Ratahi. These roads affect schools such as Carlton School, Wanganui High School, Wanganui Collegiate, St George's in the urban area, and Kaiwi and Upukanaro in the rural area. Elected members also heard about crossing and safety concerns on Great North Road, State Highway 3, with an impassioned presentation there. These roads are part of the state highway network, and the setting of speed limits and funding and construction of improvements like traffic calming and pedestrian crossing points are the responsibility of NZTA. The council, through the Mayor and Chief Executive, and prior to that, the former Mayor and former Chief Executive had advocated strongly for the community to have improvements made. Council officers have actively engaged with NZTA staff to bring about change. This has been slow. With the consultation complete and a clear community voice requesting change, now is the time for Council to once again carry the voice of the community to central government and demand some action. The recommendation of the report is for Council to advocate for the community to NZTA to bring about the changes that the community are wanting. Happy to take any questions on that.
To that end, that recommendation B has been beefed up a bit, is what I'm suggesting to you. You know, as Damien says, the previous Mayor and Chief Executive have advocated that those schools that front onto state highways have reduced speed limits. That has not happened. I mean, Upukanaro is a case in point. It's appalling. So what I've suggesting to you is that in the strongest possible terms, that the advocation happen for all those district schools and named them, just to try and make it a bit stronger.
Can I just put a little bit of context around Upukanaro for elected members? So we, as you may or may not be aware, we have a pedestrian cycle counter on the Papaiti side of the bridge. So last year we recorded 52,490 user movements across that point, so it's both directions. For those that follow any of my transportation team's Monday morning posts on Facebook, you'll see that we did a quarterly report updating the user figures. So the Upukanaro Bridge Counter has year to date, financial year to date, has received 44,739 users. That is a 13.4% increase on the same period for the last financial year. Just to put some context around that. That becomes more important when we start talking about things like Papaiti Road speed changes and that sort of stuff. But I'll leave that as just some context for the number of people that we're seeing past that point feeding towards Upukanaro.
Thank you, Damien. Are your questions around the schools? Well, firstly, Glenda, does that answer your question?
Yes, unfortunately it does. Thank you.
Ross and Charlotte, are your questions around the schools that front onto
My question is
State Highway?
My question is about B.
Sorry?
My question is in direct response to B.
Oh, well, please ask it.
So, outside of moving this recommendation, what can we do as council and councillors to strongly communicate this to NZTA? And perhaps to our community who might be listening as well.
I think the voice of the community has been really strong through this consultation process. It carries good weight for us to take forward to NZTA. I think it's important that council as a whole carries a collective voice of unity on this matter to NZTA. It is difficult. I was part of an initial lobby to NZTA from the previous mayor and previous chief executive at Upukanaro. That was an impassioned plea to bring the speed limits down. I know there's been correspondence sent to NZTA, and there's been a couple of meetings about traffic calming and pedestrian safety measures on Great North Road. We need to carry as much of the community voice as we can to the politicians and central government agencies, and I suppose, if need be that squeaky wheel.
Thanks, Damien. Ross?
Yes, Chair. When you commented about the strongest terms, Part B, I just want it noted that when the principal of Upukanaro made her submission, that we include the fact that she stated her staff are often the first responders to an accident outside the school. That means the children are exposed to the situation, plus the staff. And I think that should be added in the considerations for emphasis.
Okay. I'm sure that can be picked up by any communications when they're being drafted. So, any more questions around this particular issue?
Sorry, just kind of minorish, but on B, I don't know. Sorry, I'm not sure why Wongi Collegiate's there. It doesn't front as such. They don't. There's no entrances on State Highway as the other schools are. It's well fenced, and so yeah, just seems a little bit going a bit far to have Wongi Collegiate in there.
Wanganui Collegiate and St George's combined, whichever way you look at it, they still have state highway road frontage. That's why they were included in my recommendation, to be fair to all schools and to advocate for all schools in terms that front a state highway.
Thank you. All right, so we've finished with that particular issue. Damien, back to the overall presentation of the paper.
Okay, so you'll see in my report the summary of submissions of proposed traffic speed limits. I've included the submission demographics showing a fairly even spread across gender, a bell curve that's fairly traditional of age group demographic. It sits reasonably well with what we would expect for age group of people submitting to council. Ethnicity is biased, which is not unusual, and the location and suburb sees those areas where there was specific interest highlighted by higher representation. For example, Wikitoria Road, the airport area, Papeete Road, and also to some degree out towards Rapanui. So on to the first question. How important is it to make the proposed speed limit reductions to make it safer and easier for people to get around Wanganui. Overwhelmingly, 83% rated it as very important, moderate importance, or important. That's a significant portion of the community in support of lowering speed limits. You'll see from my paper that there are a number of quotations from the community representing both viewpoints. I'll take any questions on question 1.
Just move on. If there's no
Okay.
lights on, we'll keep moving.
Okay, I'll keep moving. Question 2, do you agree with the proposed speed limit changes around schools? Again, 81% yes, 9% no, 5% unsure, and 6% blank. I'll take...
Yes, question from
Yeah.
Rob.
On that questionnaire, was that the only question that was asked? For instance, did you ask any questions about whether it should be a 24/7 restriction or just whether it should be 30k?
That was the question that was asked. The diagrams illustrated where variables were used and where permanents were used.
Yeah.
So I'll take the opportunity just to explain at this point in time the difference between operating speed and posted speed, because it becomes quite important around schools. So the operating speed is the 85th percentile speed at which vehicles are operating in a location. Now that may be higher or lower than the posted speed limit. The posted speed limit is the maximum permitted speed imposed by the regulatory road signage at that location. So just because it says 50 kilometres per hour does not mean the 85th percentile of vehicles is travelling at or below 50 kilometres per hour. So just wanted to make that point.
Just a moment, Damon. Andrew has a question.
Yeah, look, I think I've... see.
You think you've got it?
Well, I was going to wait for you to finish this, but it actually goes back. I've just actually found an email from New Zealand NZTA from end of last year around Upakanaro, so it's probably the horse has bolted on that a little bit. We've moved on. So
thank you. Keep going, Damien.
So, acknowledging Councillor Robb's comments just then, amongst those in support of the change, there were a number of comments relating to the need for Council to consider variable speed limits, limiting the times where those speeds were imposed to just during school drop-off and collection. Our approach has been to balance the use of variable speeds and permanent speeds to where they are most appropriate for the situation that is involved. We've taken an approach in the consultation to set the variables where our expert opinion recommends them, and where posted is the preferred option. We've gone for a posted speed limit. It's important to acknowledge that vulnerable users exist in higher concentrations at school locations outside of school pick-up and drop-off times in certain locations, and these are reflected in our plan, or where the nature of the road environment requires a lower operating speed to achieve safer outcomes. Operating speeds around the schools can be lowered without the use of speed limit signage, and that can be done through traffic calming measures. Now, I'd remind you of the submission or the presentation at the hearing made by Chris Miller from Red Jacket, where he was presented with an option from councillors that which would you choose, traffic calming or a posted speed sign? And to paraphrase his response, it was basically put the traffic calming in because that actually reduces the operating speed. A posted speed limit relies on people's willingness to follow rules and regulation. So traffic calming is still the key here, and I advocate for that throughout this process, that speed limit signage alone is not enough to achieve the outcomes that we're wanting to achieve for our most vulnerable citizens.
But it's an as well as, not.
It's an as well as.
Yep. Thank you.
I'll pause, no lights.
No, keep going.
I will highlight the table that I provided in there is the CAS data from NZTA for the period of 44 years. So that's since it started, so it's 1980 through to 2024. And at the bottom there, for those that like statistics, I've done a little bit of an analysis on the return frequency and also the percentage of fatality, serious harm, minor and non-injury events that have occurred outside of schools. Now, the interesting point there is it's fairly consistent across all injury types for outside schools, representing for a round figure of 2.5% of our injury types occur outside of schools. There are some limitations that I've placed, and you can read those in the columns there. For example, Keith Street, I've only assessed Keith Street and not the 3 surrounding streets, which would have heavily skewed the numbers at Keith Street, for example.
Ross.
Yes. Damien, in that table, it refers to Castle Cliff with the data. And those numbers are fairly high compared to everybody else's, other than some of the high schools. But it covers all 4 areas. Is that data pre the traffic calming that was put outside the school, or does it include that period? Is there a shift since that was put in?
I haven't done that detailed analysis. I grabbed the data historical for that location for the full 44-year period, rather than trying to drill down to individual sites. But it is higher.
And the only reason I say that is because that is a form of traffic calming other than speed reduction signage. It forces the vehicles to slow down. They've got no choice. Yep.
Thanks, Ross. Rob?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about, in the light of what you've been saying, about page 139, Wanganui High School, Carlson School. Now, as I interpret that, all the way down Carlton Avenue, from up around Smithfield Road, down and around the London Street roundabout, down London Street to almost as far as the BP station, and then all the way from Purnell Street, from Selwyn Crescent or further down there, all the way to the intersection of the roundabout. It's all 30 k's, plus side streets that come onto it. Can you tell me whether these have variable speed signs, or do they have standard speed signs, or the electronic sign? How does that work? Because when you see the picture of the electronic, it doesn't say anything about variable times. It's page 139 I'm talking about.
Yep.
That's a high traffic area.
Yep. And the diagram there was co-designed with NZTA at the time that NZTA were looking to make those changes around that school. So that's a state highway. The choice of traffic treatment or signage was with NZTA for the use on the highway.
So
this simply covers the part that we need to play in working with our funding partner to deliver in a location where there is 2 parties involved. So there's streets there that are, well, state highways there that NZTA control, where they will be responsible for the signage. and there are streets that the District Council controls that we will be responsible for the signage on. So this is an aligned diagram based on predominantly expert opinion and advice from NZTA road safety engineers.
Do you have another question?
I guess I'm struggling with the tolerance of the public to accept that
Question, Rob.
degree. So this electronic signage, Damien, how does that work? Does that just come on during particular hours, or is it permanent? Or I mean, when I say electronic, does it come on at 2 o'clock and say school 30k, or does it sit there saying school 30k 24/7?
No, it's a variable speed sign. So the hours of operation can be set, they can be programmed to occur during drop-off and pick-up times. Outside of that, it reverts back to 50 kilometres per hour. An example of where that's already in play, or two examples of where that's already in play within this district, are Moston Road and Rapanui Road by West Mescal. And they've been there for a number of years.
All right, thank you.
I will clarify that, again, the support from the community for these changes as part of the submission process was 83%.
Thank you. Thank you. Keep going, Damien.
The question 3 related to, was, do you agree the proposed permanent speed limit reductions where informal or temporary speed limits are already in place, e.g. retirement villages, motor camps and parks? The percentage of unsure and blank was a little higher on this one, but those in favour was again quite high at 68%, with only 10% opposed. The balance of 22% was made up of unsure or blank. You'll see in my report there, I've simply captured a few of the views that were expressed in the submission process. Nothing came out of the submission process that would lead us to change what's being proposed in those locations. I'll move on to question 4. Do you agree with the proposed speed limit reductions for those identified roads or sections where the existing speed limit is inappropriate for its road environment? Again, 66.9, 67%, yes, 13.8, 14%, so with a no and the balance sitting in unsure. So again, largely in favour. Again, copies of comments in there, nothing substantial in there that would lead us to any major changes to what we'd consulted on.
And Chair, does the Papaiti Road and the Wikitoria Road submissions come into that category?
I will touch on those on the next question.
Okay.
But yeah, yes, they do in part.
Andrew?
Yeah, look, just a general comment. The reference to NZTA, they seem to have an important role with us with our with auxiliary roads. So my question is, I've seen an email that I was included with correspondence with NZTA. It says Whakakatāi New Zealand Transport Agency now consulting on its draft interim state highway speed management plan.
Andrew, can I ask you to just park that till we're going through the submission questions? Can I ask? I'll come to that at the end, or
Yep.
is this in specific relation to what Damien's working through right now?
Well, not specifically. So yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to
Is
wait
that right?
for that. Yep.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Question 5. Do you have any feedback for a specific road where we have proposed a speed limit change? 41% responded with yes, 35% no, and balance didn't comment. You'll see I have tabled below in there streets that were specifically mentioned. Some of those are not what we had in the paper, but people have taken the opportunity to raise it, so I've reflected it in this information to you.
So touching just on Papeete Road and Wikatoria Road, would you like to just talk to those particular issues, please, Damien?
So in terms of Papeete Road, to start with, there was 20 submissions received. Yes, there was 20 submissions received specifically regarding Papeete Road and our proposed changes there. Of the 20 received, 14 were in favour of the proposed changes, 6 were against. You would have heard at the hearings one of the submitters speak strongly against the proposed changes. There were a number of submissions that sought a return of the speed limit to its previous, rather than the temporary speeds that are posted there at present. I draw your attention to my earlier comments, and I'll remind you of the numbers. We've currently got recorded active user counts at the Upuknaro Bridge counter site of 44,739 users, which is a 13% per annum increase on previous years to date. The road environment at Papeete contains a high number of shared pathway users. It's got a shared pathway immediately adjacent to the carriageway with no physical protection for pathway users. Increasing the speed limit would place users at an increased risk of serious injury and death. Submissions were 14 to 6 in favour of the proposed change at Papeete. The changes, the crash history from Papeete, let me start that again. The temporary speed limits were implemented after a serious crash at Papeete in reaction to that, to bring speed limits down. I'll take any questions on that.
What about
one.
I think we're probably done with Papeete Road, but Wikatoria Road?
So Wikatoria Road, the proposed changes have been assessed by Council's Traffic Safety Engineer and considered fit for purpose as drafted. The number of submissions there were all in favour of reduced speeds in that area. The presentation that was heard at the committee sought a further reduction of speed outside in an area that we're proposing currently as 80 kilometres per hour. They sought a further reduction to 60 kilometres per hour. In this situation, when we look at the road environment and the types of users and the surrounding environment and how we could achieve the posted speed limit if we reduce it to 60 kilometres per hour, we start getting into problems with meeting the criteria of the government's comments regarding economic impacts and travel times. The proposal that came through from the community sought a much greater length of 60 kilometre per hour road in an area that is not at all densely populated and is very rural in nature and doesn't have a high number of active transport users in it. So we believe the proposal strikes a good balance between road safety and road efficiency. Implementing lower speeds beyond Onatiri Drive, which is where the document basically shows them at the moment, to the airport is unlikely to result in lower operating speeds without the substantial investment in traffic calming, and that could be complicated.
So that's
We can, further speed limit reductions in that area could be considered at a later date if this round of changes doesn't achieve the desired outcome that council is seeking.
okay. Does that answer your questions, Rob? Specifically in relation to those two roads?
Well, no. Papeete Road, can you just describe, you said there's a clash between the cycleway user and the motorist. I can't think of anywhere up there where the cycleway is adjacent to the road without a strip between the road and the cycleway. The only place could be when they make a crossing. Is that right?
It's not entirely correct. From Flemington Road up to the end of that straight, the shared pathway is immediately adjacent to the road. It is sealed between the road and the pathway with only edge marker post protection between active transport users or pathway users and vehicles.
Well, it must have been changed since I went
Thanks,
up on
Rob.
it. But so you're saying there's no strip between the cycleway and the road. What's the distance from the road to the cycleway?
Yeah, if you don't...
The two are connected.
Yeah.
The seal is continuous between the pathway and the edge of the road. There's only edge marker posts on that section of straight. It does change beyond there where the two are separated, but you still have a crossing point on Papeete Road.
Right, thanks, Rob. Ross?
Yeah, thank you. I'm in awe of your knowledge. It's like the old street maps. You seem to know so many streets. My question is, Mostyn Road, there were 9 submissions, all basically around the school. Is it correct that Roading is looking at a management plan for Mostyn Road because it's much longer than the school, because it goes through 4 zones? It's quite complicated, and that it is in the long-term plan somewhere, I think, 4 years from now or so.
My memory's not good enough to remember what part of that Mostyn Road work is in the current LTP, sorry.
Perhaps you could come back to the committee on
I
that.
can come back to you on that.
Thanks,
But there is a
Damien.
traffic management plan being looked at, or a roading management plan.
There's various projects in that vicinity that are being worked through.
If you could come back to us on that, thanks,
I'm
Damien.
fine with that.
Yep, thank you. Michael?
Apologies, Madam Chair, this is off topic, but I was very interested in looking at the Victoria Avenue and surrounding roads speed limit reductions, and I just wanted to ask, have you got a collection of the CBD roads, and is there appetite for reduction in speed limits on our CBD?
Yeah, there was some comments received through the submission process about Victoria Ave and some of the surrounding roads. There's a number of developments, residential and commercial, with the court precinct and police station moving, that I think will trigger the need for council to take a wider look at the CBD area and speed limits and traffic flows that are imposed in that area. A good example of where an operating speed is well below posted speed limit is the lower sections of Victoria Avenue, which, although posted at 50 kilometres per hour, I would purely suggest, that that speed is very rarely attained by the vast majority of motorists in that area. It's an example of where traffic calming and side friction of a high number of parked vehicles has created quite a safer operating environment.
Yeah, I totally agree. So is this something we can take off topic to another time on that CBD? Awesome, thank you for that.
Thank you. Damien, have you finished? You want to keep
No,
going?
no, we'll keep going for. Okay, the question 6, do you want to make us aware of any other locations on the local road network, public roads that are not state highways, where we should review the speed limits? Again, I've included a table there of sites which the community has raised. The takeaway for my team out of this and myself is to go and do some work and have a look at these areas to address some of the perceived concerns and to look at whether we bring them forward in future changes for speed limit reductions or for traffic calming. I will, as part of that, despite the fact we said that excluded NZTA, there were 10 submissions specifically around NZTA sites. So again, I urge council to take the advocacy approach on those. These are the 10 submissions relate to sites that have already been discussed today. There was a reasonably large number of submissions that wanted council to look at speed limits and traffic calming in the wider Rapa Nui area, and I just use the Rapa Nui area as a general term to cover Rapa Nui Road, Tayforth Road, Brunswick Road, that Blue Skin, Watt Livingston, and that sort of stuff. There was a number of submissions that sought us to do some work there, so that's provided us with some good guidance. In the hearings, you would have heard from a resident on the Matarawa Valley Road seeking some action around there. This is something that I've tasked the team with having a look at signage options around the Matarawa Valley Road, not necessarily the reduction in speed, but certainly at least advanced warning signs on the suitability of the road for certain vehicle types, or where it's not suitable for certain vehicle types, as the case may be. The presentation or submission regarding Oakland Avenue, again, there's no speed limit changes proposed within the current consultation. Council officers will undertake traffic counts and speed recording in the area and consider traffic calming measures that may be appropriate, bearing in mind that any works that we prioritise in terms of traffic calming and road safety will ultimately be prioritised to fit within whatever budget we're allocated. So areas which have the highest risk will invariably be prioritised over areas where there is a much lower risk, simply to fit within budget, because we can't do everything at once. Through this submission process, there's been some minor adjustments to the locations of signs. I'm proposing that those are undertaken. The example of that is there's no map showing the extent of the speed reductions at Rapa Nui Road. That's a piece of work that I've just had the draftspeople working on at present, just to produce what's articulated in the writing on a map sense. And there was a submission made relating to Fordell and the location of the signs there, noting that they didn't align with the current sign locations. That correction is proposed to be made as well, just to bring everything into match with existing signs, so we don't have staggered speed limits existing. I'll take any
So
questions.
I think we're pretty much done, Damien, from your perspective and what you wanted us to be aware of from your report. Thank you. Just before I go back to Andrew's point about NZTA, are there any other questions that you'll need answered before we move on to those recommendations? Ross?
I just need to apologise and withdraw my comment about Moston Road and the long-term plan. It's not listed there.
Thank you. So, all right, before we get into the recommendations themselves, Andrew, did you have something, a piece of information that might shed light on B up there about how we should proceed forward?
I'll ask the question, and you can tell me if it's not. But I've had a number of discussions with NZTA, with the relationship manager Linda Stewart, around the just general safety and speed and efficiency of our roads around Wanganui. And it took me a while to find in my filing system, but there was a submission process that NZTA Whakakatahi put forward in November last year, where they said, we're now consulting on the draft interim State Highway Speed Management Plan and the Land Transport Rule Setting of Speed Limits 2022, etc., etc. We're also proposing a permanent speed limit of 40 kilometres per hour on State Highway 4 through Upakanaro, etc., etc. So there, I'm wondering what, how you interact with their own submission to inform what we do here, if that makes sense. So, for example, they would, through their submission process, would find, get views from our community. So do you interact with NZTA in regard to their submission process and findings, and inform yourselves?
We don't get directly involved in their submission process because that's their process to follow. The outputs of their consultation process, we're actively engaged with their staff on, and the example of that is the likes of Carlton Ave and London Street, where it's been co-designed effectively between Council and NZTA to match the outcome of the NZTA consultation process. So those variable signs that are shown there, that is an outcome of their consultation process. That is the position that we've supported our funding partner on in that location.
Okay, so to further explore that, we've had passionate pleas from a resident around Great North Road and one from a principal at Upakanaro, which are on state highways. They've come to us at council to make pleas, so I'm just wondering how that interaction between NZTA works, but it sounds like you've got a co-design or a relationship with them.
Yeah, so we've been working with NZTA staff on options for Great North Road. We've contributed to that discussion. Ultimately, the advancement of those projects and the funding of those projects falls to NZTA. It doesn't fall to the ratepayer. So ultimately, they are the final decision maker on what gets advanced and what doesn't. In terms of Upakanaro, again, it's at Upakanaro, unfortunately, it is setting a speed limit on a state highway. We advocate as much as we can. We carry the voice of the community. The end decision sits with NZTA.
Yeah, I understand that. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Can we turn our minds now to the recommendations that we have before us? I propose that to move the recommendations as drafted up there, which I'll read through in a moment, if I get a seconder. Well, I've got a seconder, so thank you, Josh. Yeah, that's all right. Just one thing at a time, Rob. Would you like to put your mic on? And would you like to explain to me which you want them all put separately?
I want A taken separately, please.
Okay, so what I propose is I'll read through them all, And then we will...
Can I read below C, please?
I'm going to read through, just a minute, Rob. I'm going to read through them all. They are moved and seconded, and then I will put each item, each A, B, C, etc., up separately, and you will have the opportunity to vote on it separately and speak to it separately. Okay, so that the Strategy and Policy Committee recommends that Council continues undertaking traffic calming measures around schools within the Whanganui district, and recommends that Council communicates to NZTA in the strongest possible terms advocating for reduced speed limits around schools within the Whanganui district that fronting state highways, including Kaiwi, Carlton Schools, Whanganui High School, Whanganui Collegiate and Upakanaro School, and recommends that Council writes to NZTA advocating traffic calming and pedestrian protection measures on State Highway 3 Great North Road, Whanganui. D, adopts all decisions made during deliberations and they would be incorporated into the Traffic and Speed Limits Bylaw 2024, and confirms that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the issues related to traffic safety, and the amended Traffic and Speed Limits Bylaw 2024 is the most appropriate form of a bylaw, and C, the amended Traffic and Speed Limits Bylaw 2024 is not inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990, and at F, adopts the changes proposed in tables A, B and C to the Traffic and Speed Limits Bylaw with a commencement date of the 1st of July 2024. So, we are moved and seconded. 4.3a recommends that Council undertakes traffic calming measures around the schools in the Whanganui district. That is the recommendation. Would anybody like to speak to it? Do you want to speak to it, Rob?
Yeah. The government, in their wisdom, has stated that the policies of councils around the country need review in terms of speed limits. And they did that on good grounds. Now, those of us who have driven up from Turangi up to Taupo will know that there's 4 or 5 60k limits there now where there's virtually a house or two. And this has serious impacts on economic impacts and travel time impacts. And so they have said that this needs review. What concerns me about what we're putting up here is that it doesn't seem to have the detail yet that's acceptable to the public. Now, I know that overwhelming number of submissions say 88% in favour of 30k outside schools. I would vote for that too. But if it said, do you believe that it should be 24/7, and do you think it should be on school holidays and at 9 o'clock at night, the vote would be the other way around. So we've got to be very careful with the questions that are asked here. And this is what's occurring in this particular resolution. I look at the detail in the maps and you start to wonder. Up at St John's Hill School there, page 130. Why do we need 24/7 school holidays and 9 o'clock at night, 30k limit in Peaks Road? And it also includes a side street there with a cul-de-sac in it called Churchill Crescent. What's the point? When you start looking at City College, page 136, you see that we've got a 30k limit down in Jester Street. It also goes all the way down St Hill Street, which will be a difficult one to manage. But then it's a permanent 30k all the way around Bassett Street, all the way around past the intermediate school down almost to Victoria Avenue. Why does Bassett Street need to be 30k's? Now, there is no exit from the Boyd City College onto Bassett Street. It's fenced all the way around. I mean, these are the inconsistencies that are riddled through these documents. And I think that once that people see this, the public see this and experience this, there's going to be a big pushback on a lot of these areas where we're pushing for a 30k limit. The Jury Hill, what's the point in Burt's Lane being 30k's? You know, and so I can't vote in favour of this, not because I don't believe in a 30k limit outside schools, but it's the way that it's being applied. You know, and I heard, oh, it's because there's a speed bump there. You know, the stupidness of that statement was highlighted by the discussion about Victoria Avenue. There's speed bumps all the way through Victoria Avenue, yet we're still going to have a 50k limit down there. I would put you that anybody that drove through Lower Victoria Avenue at 50k's would be a serious risk to life and limb. It doesn't. That's an area that should be 30k's. We're not addressing that.
Great. Got 30 seconds to go.
The same with Papeete Road, Airport Road. Now, I lived 14 years in Papeete Road. To go back to a 60k limit all the way up to Waiata Road, come on. You know, it's unnecessary. And so I think this is where the government will step in and ask us to review some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Who wants to go next? How about you, Ross?
Oh, there is an order. Oh, okay. I'll keep it brief. My mum used to say, be careful what you wish for. And the public has been very, very clear. And quite often you hear the remark that we don't listen. Well, listening and doing are two separate things. We have listened, and hopefully we are doing, but be careful where it lands. And Vic Ave, there are 9 speed humps. Nobody's ever complained about it until we put speed humps in Guyton Street. But the 9 in Vic Ave does slow us down, and that's why very few cars will attempt to do 50, because they physically can't.
It's you. Oh, I can stop the timer. All right. Thanks, Ross. Glenda.
Thank you. I am in support of this, and actually, as Damien was giving his report, so well detailed, thank you, Damien. I think I was just really assured that the due diligence has been done when considering the speed limits around the schools and whether that should be variable or permanent. So thank you for that. I am assured that the right decisions have been made. And just to talk about the speed humps that was just commented on previously, I think it's not just about children or caregivers or anyone from the public crossing the roads to keep them safe. It's also about our street races that we've got. And I know that there are a lot of roads around Wanganui now that are being used for that. So that is a very good reason why to have speed humps in some of these areas, so that that also calms our street races as well. So I'm very happy to support A as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda. Yeah, Andrew?
Yeah, look, I support this as well, and I do want to say well done. There's over 120 pages of summary here, not to mention the work that would have gone on proceeding to get to the 120 pages as well, including submissions. So I'm certainly no expert on road design and engineering, and what I would say is that I feel much better informed, and I think we all do around the table here, from the effort and the detail that's in this report. And ultimately, for our community, it's sometimes a balance when you think about road speed between safety and expediency. I'm always a man in a hurry, but I know that safety is more important, and I get told to slow down by my wife and my kids when I'm going too fast, and it's a good thing. What I would also say is that, I hear perhaps some voices around some inconsistencies, but it's pretty hard to have different speed limits at different times. I would say I would rather just stick with one single speed limit 24/7 and know in my head what that looks like and have that knowledge all the time, rather than actually different speeds at different times. So I think well done, and on the significant effort, and as I said, I support this. Kia ora.
Thank you, Andrew. Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to congratulate Damien on his report. I'll just add to the numbers as well while I'm here. So 12 children die every year due to car accidents. 269 are hospitalised. Wanganui is the leading hospitalisation DHB in the country for children. To give you an example of these numbers, and why is that important, by the way, hospitalisations versus death? Because one of the comments on here was a bit ill-informed, and that's because children's bones bend as opposed to break. So high-impact minor injuries bend the rib cage into the heart and lungs, causing long-term substantial damage. So it's quite important not to have our kids get hit by cars. I think we'd all agree with that. In Wanganui, 52% of all hospitalisations are Māori and Polynesian, so that goes one little thing as well. And for the numbers from Damien, those numbers may look low, but when we look at a problem where you can hit the high impact is where you should hit first. And I just did a reconciliation against the EHINZ, Environmental Health Agency's numbers on Damien's numbers. If we were to fix these, the roads identified by Damien and his team would fix 69% of all children hospitalizations. So the roads chosen, Damien, I don't know if you know this, but you'll be fixing 69% of the hospitalizations, so we could solve it in those areas. So high impact, only a few roads. I'm a very happy man, so thank you for that. And I'm glad the public agree.
Thank you, Michael. Charlotte and Philippa.
I'm sure it'll be no surprise that I too support this, and I think all of the public that submitted on this, it gives us all a lot of confidence to make this decision. I was really happy with the balance, with the cost balance between the variable and permanent signs, understanding that the variable signs are a much, much larger cost. And I think that balance was struck really well looking at the maps. And the other thing I'm very pleased about this is the confidence that it will give me to encourage my children to walk to school without me when we are all ready for that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlotte. Philippa.
Yes, I'm going to support this as well, and thank the team for all the work and the submitters and Damien for speaking so well to it. I am concerned, obviously, that we may have to step back a little bit with the government's proposed changes, but I've been reassured as much as I can by what staff have said to us and how well we've gone through this. I am concerned, perhaps, and I don't know if we did, but that I think we in certain instances we need to specifically consult with New Zealand Police, and it would be with health in different situations, but it would have been good, and to hear from New Zealand and Wanganui police around this, and particularly in the whole ability to enforce, because I imagine that we know that how short we are of police officers, but I guess that's just something going forward that that they will work with and deal with as best they can, and it is what what it is. I guess when I look at it, I mean, I hear what fellow Councillor Vincent's saying around the schools and the speed limits, etc. But my reading of it, unless I've got it completely wrong, I think is the red is variable. Is that and that my reading of all those maps, as you can see, reasoning around that. Where the 30 kilometres is only variable around school times, I guess, and that the purple are permanent, and I can see good reasoning around that too. So I think we've listened to our community. I think we're doing the right thing, let's but obviously NZTA getting them to step up and everything, and hopefully getting the government to actually listen to communities, that they make decisions and put their legislation around us rather than around what they might think in regard to us knowing our people better. Thank you.
Jenny.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you to Damien and the policy team for a really excellent process in reporting to us. It's extremely highly appreciated, and also probably even more to our community for stepping up, because we've heard from our community as to what is happening within our streets, particularly with regard to our schools and the safety and protection of our children. So I'm really, really thankful to our community for what they've presented to us here, and they've made our decision making a heck of a lot easier, because we know we have that support. I know that change can be annoying. We're used to going through those same roads at the same speed, locked in our own little minds about our own hurrying and the fact that we've got to get somewhere that's so jolly important. But nothing's more important than caring for those who are vulnerable in our community, and particularly our children. I do remember back in the day sending my kids to school. They used to walk to school, Aranui. And I didn't give a second thought to road safety. Things have changed, and I know that the crossing in Cornford Street for Aranui School is annoying a lot of people, and I understand that. It annoys the heck out of me. But when I think of the alternative and the harm that could come to children, and has come to harm that has come to children in Cornford Street alone, it's worth it. What we're doing is absolutely worth it. We just need to learn to get out of our own heads and slow down a little bit, and maybe smell the daisies a bit more and think more about our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Totally supportive of this recommendation and the suite that's coming after it. It's a bit of a slam dunk really for me. Keep our kids safe. It's got to be that simple. Big shout out, Damien, to you and your team, and Elise for the work and the process that you've gone through with us. Really, really appreciate it. I think it makes for good decision making. So thank you, thank you, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? One against. All right, we're going to... Can you go back up? That was just A. So I'm hoping that everybody's not going to need to speak to every one of these items, but I've had a request that they be put up separately, so that's what we'll do. 4.3B recommends that Council communicates to NZTA in the strongest possible terms. We have about reduced speed limits around schools that front onto the state highways, including Kaiwi, Carlton Schools, Wanganui High School, Wanganui Collegiate and Upakanaru schools. Does anybody want to speak to this? I will just say that I'm very supportive of this, and I expect all of my colleagues to be the same, and ask or request the Mayor to use everything in his kete to bring this matter to NZTA's attention. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. C recommends that Council writes to NZTA advocating traffic calming and pedestrian protection measures on State Highway 3, Great North Road, Wanganui. Same goes. Anybody else want to talk? Speak? All those in favour, please say, oh no. Speak. Right, come on.
Mine's a technical question, really. Obviously,
question.
I mean, can I have an email to direct me to write to that, please? To NZTA for number C. I'm just wondering how actions are taken from here.
So we can fix that up behind the scenes.
Right, thank you.
I'm sure the team will. I know that there's already been conversations that have occurred, but yeah, you and the Chief Executive and Damien will fix that, no doubt. Rob, did you want to speak to this?
Members will recall that we had a submission, a very convincing submission, with a video of an 8-year-old trying to cross Great North Road. And so the need for some traffic calming in Great North Road is a given. I hope that we go to NZTA with a recommendation as to what should happen there, rather than leaving it to NZTA to make their own decision. Where that video was taken, there still is the remnants of the Kiwi crossing, the pole with the, they had to put the barrier arm on and swing it out. And of course the school won't do that. So I think that needs to be reintroduced there. And then the real need is for further down Great North Road, near St Leonard Street, as close as you can get it there, for a crossing in that area. And I hope that the recommendation to NZTA focuses around that, what we're going to do there, rather than just, what do you think we should do?
Thank you, Rob. Ross.
Keeping up with my new goal to be brief, I want to reiterate that parent submission from the other day. That couple, husband and wife team that presented, we listened, we do listen, it has made a difference, it's appearing there today, and by the way, submissions end May the 2nd.
All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. D, that we adopt all decisions made during deliberations and they be incorporated into the traffic and speed limits bylaw. Rob, can I bunch them all up from now on?
Yeah, no, I'd just like to, I voted against the first one, I can't vote
Okay.
against adopting it.
Sure, okay. So that we adopt all decisions made during deliberations and they be incorporated into the traffic and speeds limits bylaw 2024. Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? One against. Rob? Carried. Thank you. We can... That's all right. We're confirming that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the issues relating to traffic safety, and that the amended traffic and speed limits bylaw 2024 is the most appropriate form of a bylaw, and that the amended traffic and speed limits bylaw 2024 is not inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, and that we adopt the changes proposed in tables A, B and C to the traffic and speed limits bylaw with a commencement date of the 1st of July 2024. Does anybody want to speak to those? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Oh, sorry. Yes, Rob voted against. So with that, I think we've come to the end of our meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance and participation. We'll just close our meeting with a karakia. I oha ki runga ki a ranganui. I oha ki raro ki a papatunuku. Wakatairanga, te kupu, te kōrero, te mahi. Ki te pō o te whare. Hei taonga hi mahi a muri. Ka puta ki te wai au, ki te ao marama. Huie, taiki. Thank you, everybody.